Okay, and here we go. Hello everyone. You guys can hear me?
Hello. We're live
Loud
on
and
the stream.
clear.
Okay. Gonna check the volume quickly. Can you just say hi?
Hello, everyone. Hello, hello.
Okay, that should be good, I think.
Okay.
Should I put another song?
You can leave the music playing for now, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
goody.
Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, testing.
Do you need to test the music?
Well, it was a little too loud, but you fixed that.
Yes. Might little slow at
test
the
your
reaction.
mic real quick. I'm checking the levels here. I can hear myself, like the stream and all that.
Sorry about that. I was typing up a little blurb. Yes, can you hear me just fine? Yay, nay. Yay, nay. We good? Should be good.
Your level and mine is good. Cordell said.
Hello, hello. Test, test. Hello, hello. What do you think?
Still as charming as ever.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're pretty solid right now. Yeah.
Oh, Peaches, welcome back. Good to see you.
Cuckoo, Peaches. Ooh, some problem with the stream?
Je
Very
suis,
good.
je suis
Okay,
ici.
so
Yes.
it's 7 minutes until the top of the hour by my clock, so just keep running music in the meantime. We could just do a little content chatting. I figure I'll probably be literally like 5 minutes after the hour when I start the official banner, you know, where we doing the editing and stuff. Is anybody here already? Oh, just the one. Okay, so she already knows what's up. I'll be if anybody's here, I'll address them in the meantime. Yeah.
I'm gonna
Sounds
learn
good.
French just from hanging out with you, Cordell. You and Peaches. It's gonna be great.
You know, in many ways, I'm hoping that people from different culture would actually join us and listen to different languages and share their own languages. You know, like my dream would be to listen to the Little Mermaid in Danish and then have it
That would be
translated.
cool. I'd like that a lot, actually. It'd be really nice.
But it's the case for many other things. I mean, when I think about the originals, there is a lot of text that I know that I've only known the translation.
And then you should definitely get in the habit. I notice that when you get thirsty, you pour yourself a glass.
Yes.
So if we can make sure that we mute our mics if that's something we're doing. Like if we're drinking and gulping, then maybe not the best.
Yeah, I need to be careful with the sound coming out of my mic.
It's
Just-
so crisp that it catches everything, unfortunately. For good or ill.
Yeah, probably for ill actually. But you guys can always tell me, you know? Yeah, always feel open about saying any remark about the sound and everything. I'll keep an eye on everything like that. Cordell, your volume is low. Huh. Oh, you guys hear me from... Okay, actually, you guys need to lower my volume on Discord, I think.
You need to lower your volume on Discord.
How do I do that?
Oh, the little gear settings. You go to voice and video, and then the
Are you saying that
input
Vexing
volume.
and myself need to lower our outbounds?
No,
or
no, it's
what
me.
do you
It's me that needs to do it actually. So I go to the what? Wait.
So the gear settings,
Gear settings.
and then you click on voice and video. I have my input set to 80%.
Oh yeah, I see. Okay.
Mhm.
I am.
So that's whatever I'm doing going out to the world
Okay,
is gonna be.
I'm gonna change mine. So I don't know how that's gonna sound.
Let's try a 10% drop.
Test.
So like do 90. I can still hear you.
You can still
How's
hear
he
me?
sound, Peaches?
Okay. Now I'm gonna augment on my side, I guess.
So his volume needs to be increased. It looks like.
And what about now,
So-
Peaches? Is that better? Is that better, Peaches? I just
There's that
maxed
10
it out.
second delay.
Yes.
So yes, you are good. We're
Okay.
golden. All right. Also, welcome to Not for Nothing Poetry and Philosophy for Living. We got another new person here. That's nice. Oh, they're gone. Rip. They will come and go. Mm-hmm.
Okay, because it's not a good reference because it doesn't show real life how many people are in the room.
That's fair.
I've got an internet delay about 2 to 7 seconds. Yeah, that's what I figured. I have no clue how to change that though.
Hey,
Okay.
John, what do you think of that intro I just typed up, eh?
Oh, I like the intro. I love it. Should I replace it?
What do you have? Let's take a look here.
I don't
No,
know.
I think what you've got for the channel is good. This is what Blocks is going to read off. So, or we will read off whoever it is.
Well, I think I'm gonna read a poem while we wait for blocks. If that's okay with
That
you.
sounds good. Go for it.
Let's see, something nice. Here we go. I'm gonna turn off the music, and here we go. Don't lose your peace of mind, for what was left behind was to be forgotten. And if none too often you spend nights pondering, is he still wandering alone in the depth of night? Then you'd know you were right. Don't lose your time of days wondering what could have been. We won't see eye to eye. Another holds your chin and spins your heart and love. And if sometimes you think of a present wherein you and I would still be, know that soon you'll be free. So Peach says the delay is most likely the internet signal. It just wanted everyone to know as far as audience participation is concerned. Thank you.
That's fair. Since we're just gonna read off whatever poems that come to mind, let me grab. Let's see. Let's look at the poem of the day.
I just want to do a quick level check. I know we have Peaches and Cream listening in, so I'll just step it up to kind of the higher end of when I'm speaking and getting a little bit louder. How's this sound at this point? Am I dominating the is this significantly louder than the other people when I speak at this volume, or is this acceptable?
There's about a 2 to 7 second delay, so give it a
Yeah,
moment.
I realize that.
Hmm.
I'm gonna answer my phone. I'll be right back. Gonna turn it
Sounds
off
good.
actually.
Smart move. I'm gonna do the same.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, we're getting just about ready to start. Yeah. Just wondering if there's anywhere else I should go, like promote this link for this content.
Okay. Cordell sounds much better. You sound great. Blocks. Okay, it sounds like we're good. I love it.
Okay. I've got the poem of the day if you want me to read that one out.
I would love to.
Okay. Absences by Donald Justice. It's snowing this afternoon and there are no flowers. There is only the sound of falling, quiet and remote, like the memory of scales descending the white keys of a childhood piano outside the window, palms, and the heavy head of the Sirius inclining, soon to let down its white or yellow white. Now, now only these poor snowflowers in a heap, like the memory of a white dress cast down. So much has fallen. And I, who have listened for a step all afternoon, hear it now, but already falling away, already in memory, and the terrible scales descending on the silent piano, the snow and the absent flowers abounding. Hmm.
Lovely reading. Thank you very much.
Hmm.
Do you have another one that you'd like to share?
Well, I think we're going to be cranking into William Blake now. It's 5 past. So,
Okay.
Blocks, John, do you want to take us away?
Yeah, just a second. Almost there.
Okay. I got a short one here. Let's grab this one. This one is a little teaser taster of William Blake called A Divine Image by William Blake. Cruelty has a human heart, and jealousy a human face. Terror the human form divine, and secrecy the human dress. The human dress is forged iron, the human form a fiery forge, the human face a furnace sealed, the human heart its hungry gorge.
Could you read it again, actually?
Sure. A Divine Image by William Blake. Cruelty has a human heart, and jealousy a human face. Terror the human form divine, and secrecy the human dress. The human dress is forged iron, the human form a fiery forge, the human face a furnace sealed, the human heart its hungry gorge.
That was lovely. I like it.
Mm.
I'm not sure of
Yep.
the symbolism though.
William Blake tends to like wax eloquently into religious symbolism, so we'll crack into that here in a few minutes. Just so you know, Blocks, we can hear your keyboard when you're typing.
That's fine. Okay,
Mhm.
guys. I think it's about time to kick this off. Should we wait a few more moments, or are we about ready to go?
We can go whenever you want, I believe. I
Okay.
can put a timer if you want to. Wait. 10,
Um,
9.
I'm just going to do a short rambling here before I start the official thing. Let's
Five,
count down.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Not for Nothing Poetry and Philosophy for Living, brought to you by Cordell, Vexing Cat, Luna, and myself, your host, Jonathan Block. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really happy to be participating in this project. We're going to be doing this once a week on Saturdays as a live stream, which will then be edited down to a podcast format and released on a very variety of platforms. There will be a specific topic for each week, and it will be rotating throughout the weeks with a different poet, philosopher, poetry style, or philosophy each week. In the first month, this is the very first episode. We did a dress rehearsal, so to speak, last week. It will probably be released eventually as episode 0. We did Rumi last week, but it was more of a trial to see how we could get everything together tech wise. We're going to have a different subject each week. The first month, we're going to try and stick to philosopher poets just for the theme of this podcast, which is philosophy and poetry. We can kind of diverge from there. I'm so happy that anybody who's here listening to this is here, whether you're catching it in the live stream or the podcast. I'm pretty excited about this content. Cordell, how are you doing today?
Hello, Blocks. I'm doing excellent. Thank you for asking. Well, what else can I tell you? This week was my birthday, so that was fun. And
All right, happy birthday.
yes, thank you. And except of that, I'm just like you, really looking forward to reading poetry all together and having conversations about it.
Great. Vex and Cat, our wonderful voice actress, is on hand. How
Mhm.
are you feeling today, Vexing?
I'm doing pretty well, John. Also, like Cordell, I'm excited to crack into some poetry and discuss with you guys some of the merits and the pitfalls of each poem as it stands, and then the poet himself. Overall, it was really nice this week. I got to say happy birthday to Cordell on his birthday, which I felt, nice. I caught part of his stream that day. So it was a good time. Uh, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, John, but thank you for asking.
Great. So we have couple different areas of the world represented here. Um, Cordell, why don't you tell people where you're at on the planet?
At the moment, I'm in Belgium, in Brussels, actually, the capital. So, a lot of political activities going on in here. And yeah, I mean, international wise, I guess my parents are from North America and South America, so I do see the world as a big playground rather than, being bounded by the country I live in.
Cool, sort of a global identity there. Um, I personally am in Northern California, and then yeah, Vexing Cat, why don't you tell everybody what part of the world you're in?
I'm also I'm from North America, specifically Americas. I'm in Alaska, so I'm literally at the opposite end of the world from our dear Cordell here. But it's cold, it's snowy. There's not much to tell. If you ever want to swing by Alaska, it's great to hike and to visit. There's a lot of outdoor stuff. So, but yeah,
Looks like we're all
that's
Northern Hemisphere kids. And you won't
pretty
hear her
much.
voice. She's our in the booth and basically does research throughout the week on the topic. Luna
Hmm.
is over on the east coast of America, so she's also in the Northern Hemisphere. But the reason I brought this up is we're covering 4 different time zones here, and I'm not sure where you're at in the planet, but if we ever refer to times, I'll try to do it in Greenwich Mean Time. And yeah, that's about it as far as like when the show happens. Speaking of which, the broadcast of the show begins at 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. I believe that's 9 p.m. for Cordell, noon for me, and then 11 a.m. for Vexing. And I'm not exactly sure for Luna, but I'm very glad that we all got together for this. And if you enjoy this kind of content, whether you're listening on the podcast or on the stream, just remember we're going to be doing this as a regular thing on Saturday at that time. So maybe you want to plan for it. I'm not sure, but it should be a whole lot of fun. Speaking of Luna, she put in a nice amount of work this week on our subject, which I'm getting to now. This week's subject is the British poet, author, painter, engraver, and philosopher, not so much self proclaimed, but really deep philosophical content in his work, William Blake. We're going to be covering him today. Um, basically, yeah, he is not as well known as somebody like, I don't know, Plato or Nietzsche or William Shakespeare. You know, you have these philosopher names that everybody knows are household names. Blake is more or less a household name, but usually amongst a bit more, you know, whether they're more educated or simply just a huge fan of poetry, he's not quite as tropey as someone like William Shakespeare. But having looked into his work, I was familiar with some of his poems, but upon deciding to make him this week's subject because he is a philosopher poet and we wanted to find some good ones for the first month, I realized that this might be one of the most, if you look at his ability and influence versus his exposure, he might be one of the most least exposed poets on earth as far as people know about him. But he's really a prolific writer who had just a lot to offer and really had some new perspectives. And I gained a lot of respect for him and realized that I think going into his work more is better than less. And what I really mean by this is I believe this show in general, and specifically this episode, can operate as a primer in your life. If you're interested in this stuff, you know, we're not going to be able to do extensive documentary work or read all of his poems. So if you pick up something from this and you gain some interest on William Blake or any of the poets we ever cover, I encourage everybody to go, you know, out there and look into it some more. I'm finding that upon researching this topic, there's literally more than I could possibly cover in the 2+ hours that we're going to be streaming today. Anyway, any just vague thoughts on the subject? We'll start with Cordell. What do you think about William Blake?
Personally, on my hand, you'll find nothing but good to talk about him. Like, the way I see it, he's from that generation of romantic poets that were straight up in that period of time of revolutions. And when I mean revolutions, I mean the ones that actually are the foundations of democracy as we know it today, like the French Revolution and the American Revolution, and also all the South American revolutions, I guess. So it's all about, opening the mind about freedom, basically. A lot of his poems are about freedom, and even if there is a religious side to it, I feel like it's very metaphorical because at the same time he was friends with Thomas Paine, and Thomas Paine was like this genius that basically created most of the rights as we know it again today, and he also wrote this book that's called Age of the Reason, which is basically the foundation of atheism as we know it today. So I think he was a Christian, but I also think he understood that there was a cultural level to it. I don't know though. I mean, that's a feeling I have when I read his work.
Yeah, I've definitely run into different aspects of analysis of his work, both specifically and broadly, that do involve his religious perspectives. I'm not sure if I would call him a Christian or not. I can't say I could tell, but I would say that his interpretations of theism are somewhat unconventional and radical. He was willing to re-examine things and look at them differently than those around them. And I don't know if that means he definitely was or wasn't a Christian. One thing, I guess, philosophically on that is he seemed to have some level of pantheism involved in his philosophy, meaning that the entire universe is sort of made of God and all kind of one thing. Um, yeah, I meant to wait to get a little later into the episode for this specific nitty gritty, but apparently people have decided that he is most likely what is similar to a Berkeley philosophy, the George Berkeley talking about immaterialism or subjective idealism. And because of these views, I can get more into what that means later, but basically, he didn't think the material world necessarily even existed at all, and that the thought and um, the ideal forms that Plato talked about were basically the only thing that existed. And for this to be true, when all observers look away from something, how does it cease to exist? And that's sort of described by this pantheistic, all pervasive entity, which would be God. And that, in its own interpretation, seems to be pretty divergent from what I see other Christians advocating for. So I'm not sure on that one. But he definitely thought there was a God, and he definitely thought about it differently than people around him. And I think that's pretty fascinating.
I think he called himself Christian, but to be honest, by our standards and by the standard of those days, I'm pretty sure he was what most people would call an atheist. That's the thing.
Right. I would say he definitely wasn't an atheist, but his descriptions of theism more are in line with other atheistic philosophers than the theistic ones. So even though I don't think he considered himself an atheist even remotely, his ability to re-examine circumstances and reject previous dogma put him in kind of a special category.
Yeah, but the same goes for Thomas Paine, who was his friend. He was okay. He's known to be like a famous atheist, but he presented himself as a religious person, and that's the thing. You know, we can never really tell to other people what they are. I feel we have to let
Hmm.
them tell us who they are. At the same time, history has a tendency to be the judge in a very profound way.
So, vexing. What impressions, perceptions, takes, any hot takes on William Blake? How do you feel about this character?
Um, from what I've read, like he seems, how do I put this? Like I personally am not really religious, and there's a lot of religious elements in his poetry. like so for me, like some of the things that he says, but like let's see, let me grab just a lyric or a moment of something. Give me a sec.
Hello, Salty. I don't know if you've seen we've got a new viewer in the chat.
Yeah, that's Luna.
Oh, hello, Luna. Sorry.
Um, yeah. If you see Apex show up, go ahead and mod him as well.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so here we go. So he, like in the night of the ninth, he talks about the dead men are rejuvenated Christ. A lot of his poems involve Christ and morality and the effects on mankind with religious dogma. I don't think he himself was like Christian or Catholic or anything so simple with a label, but he, he was very spiritual, and it comes out in his poetry. He's an interesting guy, honestly. I like his words. He has written one of my personal favorite poems called Tiger, The Tiger by William Blake. It's interesting because it's written in the older style of English when tiger was spelled Tyger instead of Tiger.
Well, just a couple more broad notes on William Blake before we move on is that I was learning just today, in fact, that he was a bit of a Renaissance man and that he wasn't just writing. He was interested in the entire process of how humanity consumes such content. and he was an engraver. He did wax engravings mostly, I believe, wax etchings. That said, he was interested in how the art was not only conceived of and then produced, but then how it was industrial, manufactured, and distributed. So he was interested in um, the the industrial end and the distribution end. So all of the business, the creation, every single part of it, he was fascinated in, and had basically economic visions of how, in producing his work at a lower price with a better system, he would allow more people to experience his art while he made more of a profit from it. That said, through these like 10 books he was planning on releasing in such a fashion, by the eighth or ninth, the cost had gone way up to the conventional books, to the consumer. The cost of the book was higher, and he was not profiting from it. So basically, he felt as though in his envisionment of the process, he was going to have a lot more customers business wise. I guess distribution elements, that he ended up having to do all of that himself, and it became difficult and cumbersome to do. That said, at least what I'm saying is that I respect him for trying to see the holistic picture and basically be involved in more aspects of it rather than just narrowly focus in on one. He was a radical individual who was willing to rethink almost anything. I think that's pretty admirable. But you, I believe, were prepared to read Tiger. Would you like to do that at this time?
I could, if now's the best time to do it.
It's an excellent time. There's not
Okay.
time like the present, to be honest.
Very well said. Okay. The Tiger by William Blake. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp? Dare its deadly terrors clasp? Dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry?
The more I hear that poem, the more I like it.
Hmm.
I noticed the word lamb in there, and he has another poem named The Lamb. And what comes to mind is that the gentleman is deep and layered. He likes symmetry, he likes symbolism, and is willing to state one thing that means another. And I'm not certain on this, but my impression is when he does this with his layered metaphors, that the literal context of what is said is meant, and a subtext which is metaphorical and alluded to with more than two layers often. I find that to be fascinating about him. And in that line about the lamb, I wonder if that's an entire like rabbit hole can of worms that he just kind of puts in there, like a theme of his, where he
Just
just
an
like
Easter egg to something else.
yeah, I'm not certain, but I sense that just in that poem, where I didn't think this before when I heard it, but upon researching his work more, I realized there's almost definitely layers of meaning to that poem that
Mhm.
just I'm, you know,
I
ignorant to.
mean, the kind of the summary of the poem is that whoever is speaking to the tiger right now, he's asking the tiger, what divine being created you? And then each subsequent like stanza or line furthers his questions that refine the very first question of what created you, and from what part of the cosmos did the tiger's eyes come from? Who could handle that fire? And what sort of physical presence would that kind of dark craftsmanship be required to twist the sinews of the tiger's heart? And so the speaker goes on, like to discuss like when that horrible heart, like that terrifying heart begins to beat, the creator would have it would have had to have been the creator to finish the job, to have the courage to finish such a monstrosity, something so beautiful and so fierce. And so he compares the creator to a blacksmith and pounding at the anvil in the furnace. And it's just kind of an interesting imagery, that something that could create as soft and sweet spoken a lamb would also make something as fearsome and powerful as a tiger. So it's interesting, layered imagery.
Lovely
Right.
description. I like it.
Mhm.
What
Makes
about
a lot
you,
of sense.
Cordell? Any observations or thoughts on that poem?
To be honest, it's a poem that confuses me a lot, but I was reading the chat and I like a lot what Peaches say. God is the tiger, the lamb, and you, and basically everything. I think it's the part that makes me confused. That makes me confused about this poem is how metaphorically holistic it is in some ways.
That reminds me of a quote I saw in relation to William Blake. I don't think it was a quote of him directly, but anyways, I was looking into his philosophies and found this quote that said, "Of course Jesus is God, and so are you, and so am I, and so is everyone." Something like that. I
Yeah,
thought it was an interesting.
it makes sense. After even listening to that poem, it makes sense that I will be confused at that idea.
Yeah.
uh,
All right. So, what I'd like to do at this time is just to give a little bit of historical contextualization of William Blake outside of the stuff we've already mentioned, just some facts for the more by rote type learners in the audience. I'm just going to go ahead and read the first two paragraphs from the Wikipedia on William Blake. There's just generally, it's a good source for just simple names and dates and stuff. William Blake, born November 28th, 1757, died August 12th, 1827, was an English poet, painter, and printmaker. Largely unrecognized during his lifetime, Blake is now considered a seminal figure in the history of poetry and the visual arts of the Romantic Age. What he called his prophetic works were said by 20th century critic Northrop Frye to form what is in proportion to its merits the least read body of poetry in the English language. His visual artistry led 21st century critic Jonathan Jones to proclaim him far and away the greatest artist Britain has ever produced. In 2002, Blake was placed at number 38 in BBC's poll of the 100 Greatest Britons. While he lived in London his entire life, except for 3 years spent in Feltham, he produced a diverse and symbolically rich oeuvre which embraced the imagination as the body of God, or human existence itself. Although Blake was considered mad by contemporaries for his idiosyncratic views, he is held in high regard by later critics for his expressiveness and creativity, and for the philosophical and mystical undercurrents within his work. His paintings and poetry have been characterized as part of the Romantic movement and as pre Romantic. A committed Christian who was hostile to the Church of England, indeed to almost all forms of organized religion, Blake was influenced by the ideals and ambitions of the French and American revolutions. Although later he rejected many of these political beliefs, he maintained an amiable relationship with the political activist Thomas Paine. He was also influenced by thinkers such as Emanuel Swedenborg. Despite these known influences, the singularity of Blake's works makes him difficult to classify. The 19th century scholar William Michael Rossetti characterized him as a glorious luminary and a man not forestalled by predecessors, nor to be classed with contemporaries, nor to be replaced by known or readily surmisable successors. So that's that.
every time I hear about his life, I'm impressed. Honestly, to me, he's a hero. Like in a poetic sense, but also on a lifestyle scale. What I wouldn't give actually to have tea with William Blake and Thomas Paine in the same room. That must be a blast mentally.
That's kind of how I feel about characters like David Hume and Adam Smith. Like, if I could just hang out with those guys and play a few hands of poker and, like, I don't know, smoke a cigar, I'd be so happy.
Yeah, I get you. I totally get you. Imagine that. I mean, being against organized religion, that is something that even nowadays nobody dares to say. Like, nowadays, I think it's even hard to say I'm an atheist because basically it's such a taboo to say that. So imagine actually saying, I'm a believer, but I don't believe in organized religion. Gosh. And we're talking at least 2 centuries ago, literally. Like close to the creation of the Americas rather than anything else.
Yeah, the guy definitely had some gusto. So this brings me on to the next bullet point I had for today's discussion is his importance and influence from the time he was alive until today. W- In what way do you think that William Blake is pragmatically or conceptually important to, modern day man? Like what kind of thanks do we owe him? Would you guys say? Any thoughts on that?
Well, to me, it goes in the very root of the thematic he used in his poetry, and most of the time it's literally about getting free. And I think he's basically a precursor of the social fights that we've known in the basically the 19th century. If we hadn't had artists that wanted that made a glorious depiction of freedom, we probably wouldn't know freedom as we know it today, at least not in the Western societies. I'm pretty sure it's actually probably the only reason in the Western societies we see freedom as we do. Because if you look at other societies that haven't known um, that form of glorification in the historical background, I'm not saying like in recent events or even in political events, but literally in the history and in the art, well, it's harder to connect to that idea, you know. And
It makes me think that potentially some of his ideas about the indomitable human spirit and freedom, if weren't directly influencing those that created different parts of the American government, it at least indirectly influenced them with a culture of, you know, just with like free speech, for example. Maybe he wasn't an advocate for free speech personally and directly, but the way that he seems to really be, you know, able and willing to cry out against exploitation and suffering on the regular in certain ways in his own society, it's almost as though he was part of a movement of a rejection of a status quo that ignored the suffering of humanity, and that has influenced all of our lives
yeah,
painfully.
it has. When you look at it, like on a historical level, basically before the French and American Revolution, the kings did whatever they wanted. That's it. I mean, perhaps there were a few limitations because of the lords and taxations and stuff like that. But let's be honest, the people was basically crushed by royalty.
Hmm.
And I think, like if you look at Thomas Paine, history and background, he's it's basically him that wrote the most humane topics of the American Constitution, at least the most humane ones. Like as you said, and not a connection with religion and the state, not a stuff like that. Freedom of speech and ideas that are very humanistic. And I think they both fed each other on that. Like probably writers like Thomas Paine, who were more intellectually connected to logic and reason, found inspiration in poetry, and the poets probably found ideas and thematics to put on the on an artistic level.
Yeah. So I have a little note here on Bob Dylan and Allen Ginsberg recorded some Blake poems as songs, which I think that as a sentence in itself, I think goes to illustrate how influential this guy has been over a long period of time. He wasn't so famous worldwide at the moment of his living, but once critics got their hands on his work within the next 100 years or so, people started realizing, oh shit, this guy is the real deal. And it's almost like ever since then moving forward, he becomes more important as time goes on. But anyway, apparently when they did it, it had a heavy effect on them, and I guess they both hallucinated the same thing and basically saw a ghost of him. And I don't know how much weight to put on that aspect of it. But like I say, just Bob Dylan and Allen Ginsberg getting together to record Blake poems, I would say illustrates some of the weight of his concepts throughout time.
Let me wade into this just a little bit. So, William Blake was born in the 1700s, like 1750 something. Oh, I forget the exact year. But he himself was not recognized as a poet or an artist or a printmaker until he was almost 60. I mean, he lived a long time struggling to make ends meet before he like really cracked into it because people didn't want to listen to what he had to say. He was a political radical. He was a critic of conventional Christianity in the 1800s and the 1900s. Not a very popular man. Um, like he was a big proponent of the romantic poetry movement. Like he covered nature, he covered of a wide variety of like important themes in romantic poetry, but he himself, he like extolled innocence, and he like elevated children to like a higher level. Like he felt that that childlike innocence was, you know, the most important thing anybody could ever have, and that the loss of that through revolution, technology, and whatnot, it just kind of, it was lost, innocent lost. And I think that's why he, in some of his poems, like what are some of the other ones that he's
You
talked
know,
about?
on that subject of the children,
Yeah.
I think now would be a great time to read the Chimney Sweep.
Oh,
The
that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, and a quick correction, you said the 18th and 1900s. It's actually the 18th century and 19th century because he was born in the 1700s and died in the 1800s. So anybody who's, you know, it's just a weird turn of phrase that
Sure.
the 1700s was the 18th century. So anyway,
Yeah, the 18th century, 1794, and so on and so forth.
exactly.
Yeah.
I noticed you said the 1800s and 1900s, so it's just technically incorrect. I knew what you meant, but I just wanted
Yeah,
to
my
get that out there.
mistake.
Oh, fine. So maybe Cordell, do you want to read that one? I'm trying to remember the exact name.
The
The
chimney
chimney sweep,
sweep.
the chimney sweep boy or something.
Okay, yes, I'm totally good with that.
The
Just
chimney sweeper, a little black thing among the snow.
Yes, yeah.
let me look for the
I
link.
could send you a link if you want, or
I
just
got it right here.
Oh,
Boom.
you got it? Perfect, thank you.
yeah, Cordell, read that one, man. This is a great poem.
Thank you. Okay, the chimney sweeper, a little black thing among the snow. A little black thing among the snow, crying, weep, weep, in notes of woe. Where are thy father and mother? Say, they are both gone up into the church to pray. Because I was happy upon the heat, I smelled among the winter snow. They clothed me in clothes of death, and taught me to sing the notes of woe. And because I'm happy, and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury, and are gone to praise God and his priest and king, who make up a heaven of our misery. Wow, damn, I
Yeah,
wasn't ready
I
for
looked through
this.
this one yesterday. I realized this guy, it's all in there, like the stuff we've been talking about. He was willing to just talk shit. He's the rage in there against the system and the exploitation and inequity and suffering. It's like he's sitting there. Everything that I read into this poem, he wrote another one about the chimney sweep whose parents are dead. I don't know if you want to read that one next or not, just for the more context, but basically I sensed a deep rage in that poem, and I thought there was a little ambiguity, not much, but then there's like another poem on the same subject that's just basically like, Yeah, the reason I'm cleaning your chimney is because my parents died when I was a kid and I got screwed.
I love it. I love it. Personally, I love it because honestly, on a fundamental side, okay, this is very personal and I probably shouldn't share it in this kind of stream, but I just understand what he means, like, why should someone be born with more rights than the guy that's cleaning the freaking chimney?
Hmm.
It just
Hmm.
doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and then he's also seems to be indignant about the manipulation and control of the concept of God and whatever they're praying to. Not that they're not praying to God. Back to his pantheism. It's not like he's all God isn't in that church. He's almost saying like God isn't in that church any more than here in the snow with this little darkened person who's suffering.
Yeah,
Like it's all
yeah,
it's ever present, and that he's got this sense of rage that they're trying to commit some sort of monopoly on the concept of godliness. And that line he says they make a heaven out of our misery, and it's just like
yeah, it is
woof.
that. It's beautiful, actually. I wasn't expecting that pick. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I appreciate that reading, actually.
Absolutely. I don't know. It's such a brief one. Do you want to read through it one more time, maybe?
Yeah, and I wouldn't mind
Yeah,
reading
go
the
ahead and
other
hit it
one.
one more time. I'm gonna look up the other related one, and then you can read that one after because I think it's so involved. Let me find it real quick. But go ahead.
Okay. The chimney sweeper, a little black thing among the snow. A little black thing among the snow, crying, weep, weep, in notes of woe. Where thy father and mother? Say. They are both gone up to the church to pray. Because I was happy upon the heat, and smiled while among the winter snow they clothed me in the clothes of death, and taught me to sing the notes of war. And because I'm happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury, and are gone to praise God and his priest and king, who make up a heaven of our misery. Wow. Yeah, this is very anti-monarchist and pro-labor's right. I agree with you. Clothes did me. They, yeah, and they clothes of death. It's yeah, it's intense.
Okay, here's the other one I was looking for. The links in our chat there.
Thank you.
Actually, here I'll put it in the main chat here in case anybody here wants to follow along with it. This is a link to Poetry Foundation. Since I started avidly studying poetry about 6 months ago, this Poetry Foundation website isn't the only resource I've used, but it is the one I've used the most. It's well organized. It's got lots of stuff, articles. I just simply recommend it if you're into poetry. Check them out. But yeah, see what you think of this one, Cordell. It seems to flavor the first one. I believe they were written in order, in his life that the one was written later. I'm not certain, but either way, try this one on for size and see if it doesn't change the flavor of the first one.
Sounds good. You got it. So, the chimney sweeper. When my mother died and I was very young. When my mother died and I was very young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, 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 weep. So your chimneys I sweep, and in the soot I sleep. There's little Tom Dacre, who cried when his head, that curled like a lamb's back, was shaved, so I said, "Hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair." And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom he was sleeping, he had such a sight that thousands of Sweeper, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack were all of them locked up in the coffins of black, and by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing they run, and wash in a river and shine in the sun. Then naked and white, all their backs left behind, they rise upon clouds and sports in the wind, and the angel told Tom if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father and never want joy. And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark and got with our bags and our brushes to work. Though in the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm. So if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. Those poems are
So
very intense.
now that I know a little more about him, I'm certain the first time I read that, the last line, I just couldn't tell if it was sincere or just like snarky and angry, right? And now, beside the last line of that poem, might have a little double entendre. Like there might be some earnest truth to it, but I would say the majority of that sentence is these people would have you believe that as long as you obey them, everything will be fine. And in the meantime, what happens is to save your hair from being mussed, they cut it off. So like how can you how can how could it be better to not harm something by losing it? This is just absurd and damning and wrong. And I feel as though that last line expresses that rage wholly.
To me, it sounded like, okay. The problem is, I think what I felt while I was reading was this picture of somebody that looks at other and they don't even do what's right. Like, let's be honest, if he complains about being poor in a society where there is kings and stuff like that, it's probably because the kings weren't doing what's right. So I feel like he's both, like saying, like you say, like, screw this because they'll have us believe that we need to do everything, but at the same time, it's like, but they're not even doing the right thing, and if at least they would do the right things by us, we may perhaps have some kind of romantic version of what royalism should have been. That's why I feel like he meant it, though.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
All right, so I think we have a couple of poems primed for reading
There
here.
is a
Uh,
few comments that are interesting on the chat.
Go ahead.
So Peaches say that last line was the saddest. It's a political delusion. It's a comment on the social method of moral end. Yeah,
And that's the last line, I believe, of the first of those
and
two, the
very
first
just
Chinese
control.
poem.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think that was a comment to that.
yeah. I agree. Yeah, but it's true. It's true. It's oppressive, and
Well,
then they'll
oddly, I
have
think it's
everybody.
also true about the last line of the second
Yeah,
poem. I think it
Ooh.
fits both ways. I think she meant that for the first one.
yeah. Well, sorry, I'm gonna let you continue.
Oh, it's good. Uh, Sunflower. Vexing. Would you like to read that?
Certainly. Ah, Sunflower by William Blake. Ah, sunflower, weary of time, who countest the steps of the sun, seeking after that sweet golden clime where the traveler's journey is done, where the youth pined away with desire, and the pale virgin shrouded in snow, arise from their graves and aspire where my sunflower wishes to go.
Can you read this again once more?
Sure. Ah, Sunflower by William Blake. Ah, sunflower, weary of time, who countest the steps of the sun, seeking after that sweet golden clime, where the traveler's journey is done, where the youth pined away with desire, and the pale virgin shrouded in snow arise from their graves and aspire where my sunflower wishes to go.
Wow.
So brief. I like how it's grabbing your attention right when it's done. Almost like these good brief poems always feel like some beautiful person passing by that you catch. They catch your attention, you catch theirs, and then they're just like gone, and you're like, wait, I wanted more or whatever. It's just like ding there.
Congratulations, this is all the poem you're getting.
Yeah.
That actually that was beautiful. Like the first reading, I enjoyed it on like on a musical level. I want to say like the rhythm and the musicality of it, I guess. And the second time you read it, I focused on the meaning, and I gotta say, even the meaning is quite impressive. He basically is talking about temporality and time, the passage of time, if I understand well, and how, well, things grow out of the snow by following, well, you know, by following the time, the passage of time, I guess, and that's what I understood.
Yeah, this
I'll
poem
tell you
is
what.
pretty deceptively complicated. While on the surface it appears to be like nice and light and reading about a sunflower reaching for the sun, it's actually kind of associated with reality and the afterlife. I mean, the arising from their graves and then imagination. So it's like an allegory for human being. Uh, I
It's
don't know.
almost like he's talking about either a love of his or maybe just a non-sexual love, like, a family member. I don't know what, but it's almost like he's talking about a young woman that he cares about that's now passed, whether it be a metaphorical, amorphous, non-individual woman or a specific woman from his life. From my looking into his work and the multiple layer aspect, I suspect it's both, or all three. It's like he's talking about a specific woman and every woman and sunflowers all at the same time. Like that's kind of what I take from his work in general now is that if you think he's talking about more than one thing and you look and it seems to be clearly talking about it either way, that it's probably both.
Yeah, and yeah, I agree with that statement. Probably even more than both, but yeah, I totally agree with that statement.
Speaking of which, the whole time metaphor and the multiple layers, I didn't know when I was going to read it today, but I want to read The Echoing Green. I think I'm going to go ahead and do it right now.
Sounds like
Uh,
a great idea.
I usually I'd wait till after reading it to do any analysis, but I just want to point out this is written in three separate stanzas, and then the three separate stanzas have different perspectives on it, and I think that there's three separate conceptual layers that are obvious to this once you get through it, and I just wanted to mention that before I read it, and we can get into it more in a second. The Echoing Green by William Blake. The sun does arise and make happy the skies. The merry bells sing to welcome the spring. The skylark and thrush, the birds of the bush, sing louder around to the bell's cheerful sound, while our sports shall be seen on the echoing green. Old John, with white hair, does laugh away care, sitting under the oak among the old folk. They laugh at our play, and soon they all say, such were the joys when we all girls and boys in our youth time were seen on the echoing green. To the little ones wary, no more can be merry. The sun does descend, and our sports have an end. Round the laps of their mothers, many sisters and brothers, like birds in their nest, are ready for rest. And sport no more seen on the darkening green. So she brought up time from the last poem, and you brought up music. You said the first reading you were into the musical thing. This one blows my mind because on my first reading, I realized it has a relatively rigid five pulse thing. The sun does arise. One, two, three, four, five. One, two, three, four, five. Every line is pretty strictly five, and even some of them, it's like a quick double syllable, almost like a whatever they're called in haikus, how they have that pulse. So there's 5 pulses per line so clearly that it almost seems like broken or like a child wrote it or just uh, overly simplistic. But then each line fits together nicely. The whole thing has lovely structure. It's the meaning is so not simplistic that I find there to be an interesting dichotomy in the juxtaposition of the simplistic nature of each line and how it's written so humbly, and then the very rich and intricate meaning put into the poem. I find that to be a stimulating aspect of it just in itself beyond any specific meaning.
On my side, I'll be honest with you, it's one of the things I enjoy the most with the Romantic period is that they actually used very strict techniques that, okay, they are probably too strict, but at the same time, that inevitably lead to a certain form of musicality within the text itself. And then
Hmm.
they went into deep subject by using metaphors, a lot of symbolism, a lot of metaphors, and sometimes saying the exact opposite of what they represent in their poem, which I
Hmm.
find an amazing feat of, you know, craftsman in poetry, basically.
Less in the metaphor and symbolism department and more in just the rigidity of form thing, and how that produces a musical melodic form. I noticed that Voltaire kind of reminds me of that in a way.
Mm.
Like the way that when you read it, it just starts to have this, you can almost feel like a dance or like you're prancing along. It just has this feeling to it. It's like the meter just the meter and phrasing scream out of the page. Like if you didn't notice how it was supposed to be, not how it was supposed to be read in every way, but at least in some subtle way. Like you feel the rhythm to it, and if you can't, I don't know. It's like you're not reading it or something. It's just it's obvious.
To me, they almost sounds like a mantra, like those Indian songs, or even like those short religious songs that people had in on a spiritual scale. They are almost hypnotic because of their repetition level and the rhyme at the end. And I personally think that's what most poets try to reach. Even if they atheist, even if they whatever religion they believe in or doctrine or whatever, it's a reach out to something deeper, like to
Yeah.
yeah.
To be totally honest, this conversation is inspiring me to write some poetry right now, but we're busy. So, okay, I want to get back into the echoing green for a second through this analysis because I did my own armchair analysis. I'm certainly no, laureate, and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not educated in poetry and whatnot. I'm learning a lot recently, but still, I'm more of a musician and a poker player. I don't know about this stuff. But this poem, I read it and I started analyzing it. I was like, it seems I said a few things. Someone else went and looked up like a proper analysis, and I don't know if nailed it's the right word, but I was on the right track. And what I saw immediately was a three layered metaphor where he talks about the sun rising, and then in the end he talks about the sun setting, and in the middle it's the middle of the day. So there's a literal day being described here, and then there's an entire season, like a year, where they're talking about welcoming the spring, kind of the middle of the thing, and then the setting and cooling of the whole thing, and how nobody plays on the darkening green anymore, where it's like for the day and for the season. And then this sort of transcendental relationship of concepts leads forward to the third and longer form, which there's the day, the year, and then the lifetime, where they're talking about being children, being whatever, born like the spring, and um, the sports shall be seen. So there's like the beginning and the future, like the beginning looking forward, and then in the middle, it's still looking forward from the point of view of like a full grown person, where it's like old John with his white hair, laugh away care, and it's saying they laugh at our play. So now we're the kids who are like smaller before but are growing up, and then in the last one, it's looking forward still from maybe the older person's perspective, whatever it is, and now the kids are tired I mean, I guess in concept, the old people are just dying, whatever. It's over. You know, it's like literally the end. So it's like the beginning, middle, of end of a day, a season, and an entire lifetime. And then, I mean, this is a bit, projecting outward, but I think it's possible there's a fourth layer where he's not even talking about just that, but also the entire scope of humanity, where we were born, we live, and we'll all die, like all together. And I'm not certain about that fourth layer, but upon further research, he had this fourfold thing going on. So I would be less than surprised if the fourth one is there. And to me, that concept of time and the passage of time and the experience of it and the humanization of it combined with the multi-layer thing seems to be absolutely it's not quintessential. What's the word I'm looking for? It seems to be very exemplary of his work as it's been processed in this one poem. From a lot of the stuff we've talked about, it doesn't really touch on the pantheism thing or God or any of that stuff. But as far as his other sort of philosophies and things, which we'll be getting into shortly, by the way, everybody, we're going to get into more specific philosophical analysis of William Blake shortly. But I just wanted to illustrate that it seems as though he's a very complicated person who's talking of multiple layers, but at the same time is literally talking about the simple stuff. And it's not that he's not talking about a single day and a simple green that people play ball on, because he is.
Very nicely put. It was very nicely done, John. Did you want me to read Garden of Love next?
Yes, but I wanted to ask you if you had any thoughts on that analysis or further analysis of the Echoing Green or William Blake at large, or if that leads into the Garden of Love, whatever. Any thoughts?
It I don't know if it necessarily leads into the Garden of Love, but I mean, he's talking about like in the Garden of Love, he's talking about nature and he's talking about innocence. He's trying to like deal with these opposite states of being and like have them complement each other. So, let me read it and then we can kind of see how well that reflects your analysis. The Garden of Love by William Blake. I went to the Garden of Love and saw what I had never seen. A chapel was built in the midst where I used to play on the green. And the gates of this chapel were shut, and thou shalt not writ over the door. So I turned to the Garden of Love that so many sweet flowers bore. And what I saw was filled with graves and tombstones where flowers should be, and priests in black gowns were walking their rounds, and binding with briars my joys and desires.
He doesn't seem to do it in every or even many lines, but the points where he starts having like the interrelation of word structures, like not from line to line A or A B, just when the actual line itself starts to have wordplay within it. It reminds me of like some of the better Slim Shady, Marshall Mathers type stuff, where it's good on one level but good on another. I really like his wordplay. It's fun.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. The Garden of Love's kind of interesting. He's talking about, this desire and joy and in love, and then he goes to seek it out, and in where he used to frolic and find joy, suddenly there's this religious construct there barring his way, and that all of his loves and joys are now graves that are being, guarded or walked about by priests with black gowns and binding his joys and desires with briars. So they're like hedging him in outside of like his free love into like this very structured thing. And it's just kind of interesting imagery.
Any thoughts, Cordell?
Well, actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm just listening to the poetry and absorbing it, to be honest. I'm sorry.
You're good. Well, are there any other poems? What do you think? You want to read one, Cordell? You got any Blake primed in the chute?
Yes, I'll read a poem.
So I think we should just read a couple more with a little less analysis. We'll just get into some of his work, and then I'd say it'd probably be nice to take a short break, for the stream. We'll take a short break, and we can get back and get into breaking down some analysis of the philosophies of William Blake and contemporary philosophers that were influential upon him or vis-a-vis. But yeah, why don't you go ahead and read a couple? Maybe while he's reading one, you get one ready, Vex. We'll go through a few poems here, get some actual poetry content.
You guys read already Earth's Answer? I believe we didn't.
No, I don't believe we've covered Earth's answer. Go for
Okay.
it.
Earth's Answer. Earth raised up her head from the darkness dread and drear. Her light fled stony dread, and her locks covered with grey despair, prisoned on watery shore. Starry jealousy does keep my den cold and hoar. Weeping o'er, I hear the father of the ancient man, selfish father of man, cruel, jealous, selfish fear can delight. Chained in night, the virgins of youth and morning bear. The spring hide its joy when buds and blossom grow. Does the sower sow by night, or the plowman in darkness plow? Break this heavy chain that does freeze my bones around. Selfish, vain, eternal bane that free love with bondage bound. Wow. I'm actually, every time I'm amazed by his poems, like, I'm left speechless. I don't know how you feel about those things, Vex, but yeah.
Yeah, I find myself, um, I find myself feeling different ways about his poems when they get done. I'll be impressed by the meter or the content or even just the usage of words, where I find his poetry to be engaging in multiple ways. So the same poem can catch me later, where someone reads a poem of his and I like it for one reason, and later it gets read and I like it for a different reason. It's multi-layered and very, very rich in content.
Yeah, totally. I'm not even sure if I completely understand the meaning of this poem, actually. Even after reading it, it's disturbing. Yeah.
Well, we could discuss it for a moment and then go through it again if you think that's appropriate, or maybe you had another one you wanted to go.
I think we should look it up because, okay, Earth raised up her head from the darkness, dread and drear. Okay, so that's easy. We're talking about like dawn and something like that. Her light fled, stony dread, and her locks covered with a grey despair. So the morning, I guess, is not that shiny somehow. Prisoned and watery shore, starry jealousy does keep my den cold and hoar. Weeping over, I hear the father of the ancient man. There I'm starting to get lost. Selfish father of man, cruel, jealous, selfish fear can delight, chained in the night, the virgins of youth and morning bear. The spring hide its joy when buds and blossom grow. Does the sower sow by night, or the plowman in the darkness plow? Break this heavy chain that does freeze my bones around. Selfish, vain, eternal bane that free love with bondage bound.
Well, now from having gone through some of his work and the chimney sweeper boy and stuff, I know what he means now by the plowing in the darkness. he's not really speaking on virtue. I mean, he could be. It's not that he's saying anything bad about the plower, but he is in darkness. He's talking about suffering and exploitation. He's speaking about how the plower is an underprivileged person who has to go work at horrible times to get it done because he's being pressed, where it's not like he's starting at 10 a.m. and finishing at 4 p.m. Homeboy's out there at like 4 a.m. or whatever. It's either before dawn or after dusk or in a storm or all three. I don't know, but it now that I know more about his work, it's not so subtle that he's like, and then this happens. What, that's cool? And it's like obviously not cool. He's like, this isn't cool. That this guy has to do this. Like, why is this his fate while you sit in by the fire and drink tea and eat whatever, scones?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. There is also, I feel like there is some references to love though, because that last line, break this heavy chain that does freeze my bones around, selfish, vain, eternal bane, that free love with bondage bound. It's like,
I think I'm sure, again with this guy, I'm sure there's more layers, so I'm not saying this solely, but I think at that point he's talking about exploitation. He's talking about um, people taking value from someone else, and basically that the love of humanity is what's going to save us, like caring about them, and then basically they've been put into bondage unnecessarily, but that to like care and free them, like the only thing that's going to free the victims of our society is love for all of humanity. I wait, um, agape. What's that called in Greek? The that type of love for all humanity.
um,
I don't want to say this wrong.
philanthropist?
Agape.
A philanthrop?
Yeah, it's agape, Agape. It's a love for everyone. It's this sort of goodwill towards man type love.
Okay.
Here, there's six ancient Greek words for love: eros, philia, ludus, agape, pragma, and philautia. Anyway, just it seems as though the love there, again with the multi-layered thing, I think he could mean something else at the same time. But I do think that he's referring to love for the universal love for mankind. All of your brethren is in that lines where people are being harmed, and that something really will, there is a silver lining to this horrifying situation, and that's that love can save us from our own inequity.
I agree with that. It's like hearing Bob Marley's word, but 2 centuries before, actually. It's hilarious. Love
Hmm.
will save the world. I love it.
There's an interesting comparison: William Blake and Bob Marley.
Well, Bob Marley
Like,
said the same. The only thing is that's gonna save the world is love. uh,
Jackson, did you have any poems that you wanted to read at this time?
Sure. I've got two. I've got The Lamb, which is kind of a medium one, and then Infant Joy, since there's parallels between the two. I'll start with Infant Joy. Infant Joy by William Blake. I have no name. I am but 2 days old. What shall I call thee? I happy am. Joy is my name. Sweet joy befall thee. Pretty joy, sweet joy, but 2 days old. Sweet joy, I call thee. Thou dost smile. I sing the while. Sweet joy befall thee. I think William Blake had a soft spot for kids.
I'm sure of
um,
it. I'm sure.
yeah. And then the next one called The Lamb by William Blake. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Give thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead. Give thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly, bright. Give thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Little lamb, I tell thee. Little lamb, I tell thee. He is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. I, a child, and thou, a lamb. We are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee.
So, did one of you mention from the mention of the word lamb and tiger that perhaps there was an analysis that the same creator could make a ferocious beast and a gentle lamb, and there was a certain ironic dichotomy there that needed to be addressed to understand the very nature of the all ever present, all penetrating God force?
Yeah.
I think I talked about that briefly, yes.
I noticed in this one called The Lamb that it starts out talking about the creator. It seems sort of obvious that there's some sort of inference to be made about what would even bother to create a lamb, and that the very nature of the realities that we're in has some sort of metaphysical suggestion as to what created this whole shebang.
Mm-hmm. And this one's pretty obvious. He's talking about God quite literally. It's like he is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. So he's definitely talking about Jesus in this instance. It's kind of interesting. I, a child, and thou, a lamb. So is he talking about the reader being the child, and then speaking of God, and then we are called by his name? I don't know. It's really beautiful, and it's very dramatically different, and it doesn't have the heat and the prose behind it that the tiger poem does.
I think you both make a good point, to be honest. Like, we did speak about that a little bit earlier, and it truly resonates after hearing more of his poems, making the same references to the same symbolic, um, you know, the same symbolic topic, basically.
The only thing I find interesting, odd, the thing that I'm really reaching for here is that it's so obvious what he's talking about. In some respects, with his multi-layered trip, it makes me wonder what I'm missing outside of this reference to God and Jesus and creation and all that, as though that there's nothing wrong with this analysis, but that it's too simplistic and that there has to be another layer on top of it that is not, we're not mentioning. But you know, it seems like all of his work seems to do that with the whole fourfold thing or whatever.
To be honest, the more I read his poems and like put him in context, because one thing is to know that he was a friend of Thomas Paine, and the other is to actually put him in context, the more I'm surprised that they didn't hang him back in those days.
Yeah, for real. Well, I guess maybe he was lucky he wasn't that famous until he got older.
Yeah,
All
I'm
right.
pretty sure he was.
So, Cordell, if you'd be so kind as to cue some music for the break.
Sounds good.
Just go ahead and start running it now. I can speak over it for a moment.
Yes, just give me one tiny second.
All right, so we're taking a break now, everybody. I'm so happy that you're all here for the stream. Feel free to just stay and listen to the music. I think he's playing some originals, some digital beats that I made, but we have some different music that's been offered by people for use in this podcast. If you yourself want to offer any original material, whether they be poems or music or anything, and you're interested in participating, please let us know through the chat. And then I want to say just briefly that each week we're going to be promoting a different charity, and we don't have all our ducks in a row to really have like a bunch of stuff to offer, but I did want to suggest this week a specific charity. I'll do it at this time. The wildfires in Australia are way out of control, as you probably already know, and I just wanted to suggest to donate to any one of the charities that involve that. You could look it up yourself to find different things. We will have a link to a specific charity on that subject, and the one that we've chosen for this week is running through a video game website called Humble Bundle. And what those guys do is try and make video games made available to people legally, paid, and for a very low price between their bundles, their monthly thing, and their store. It's one of the better places to actually pay for video games online. And they have a specific bundle right now for the Australian wildfire relief. I think it's $30 and you get a whole bunch of games. All the money goes to charity. You can write it off. And we'll have a link to that. We don't gain anything from this. This isn't an affiliate link or nothing. It's just simply me trying to encourage you to donate something to those suffering from the wildfires and simultaneously getting yourself some really nice games and promoting some game companies that are willing to participate in such a thing. I think it's a win-win-win. So I wanted to recommend that, suggest it, and we'll see you in about 5 minutes. Smoke them if you got them. coming towards the end of the break here. Thanks for being here, guys. This is Not for Nothing, Poetry and Philosophy for Living. You're joined today by our resident poet and primary reader, Cordell. We have the beautiful voice of Vexing Cat on hand for reading and her analysis of poems. Luna is in the booth. She helps us out with different philosophical references and making sure to fact check, keep us in line. She also helped with researching throughout the week. And myself, Jonathan Block, your host. Appreciate everybody's support. It's really nice having interest in such subjects. This is our weekly live stream, which is to be edited into a podcast format and released on the various systems to release that stuff. Yes, Cordell. I am intentionally speaking to the audience. Right on, guys. I don't know if any of you have any input while you're listening to this. If you have any comments on the poems and want to get in there, please put any analysis you have, suggestions. You could ask us to read stuff again. Anything you want. Just go ahead and get involved in that live chat feed. If we end up ignoring you, it's either inadvertent or just a little overwhelmed. But at this point, it's pretty mellow. I'd love anything you guys have to input. Please get in there and let us know. In the second half, we're going to be getting into the philosophies of William Blake. More like speculation about his philosophies, because he didn't call himself a philosopher. That said, he obviously was a very deep individual into sort of a mystical, spiritual angle on stuff. So we're going to be getting into that shortly, once these guys get back. And I think in the first half we had most of the poems read towards the end. I think we're going to try and make sure and have a decent amount of poetry reading in the second half here. Don't want it to get too dull with the analysis. Maybe all of you philosophy buffs out there enjoy that more, but trying to make sure we have plenty of reading. Welcome back, Cordell.
Yeah, sorry for the noises in the back. Sorry. Didn't mean
Just
yeah.
gotta get that tea.
It's okay.
Yeah. Got myself
Just don't spill the tea. Drink the tea.
yeah.
So, was the poem Auguries of Innocence read?
No, I don't believe so. A gentleman that joined our stream, Open Set, asked if we had covered Europe, A Prophecy. That by special request. I don't know if we want
I
to.
don't think that's a poem. I believe
It's
that's
one of his
writing.
stories or written works.
Yeah, I think that's perhaps too long for this. I'd have to look into what it is, but I think that's one of his full literary works. Let me take a quick look. But if you wouldn't mind, for starting off the second half here, Vexing, perhaps you'd read Auguries of Innocence?
Auguries of Innocence. Yeah, I can do that. And here we go. Auguries of Innocence by William Blake. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. A robin redbreast in a cage puts all heaven in a rage. A dove house filled with doves and pigeons shudders hell, there all its regions. A dog starved at his master's gate predicts the ruin of the state. A horse misused upon the road calls to heaven for human blood. Each outcry of the hunted hare a fiber from the brain does tear. A skylark with wounded in the wing, a skylark wounded in the wing, a cherubim, a cherubim does cease to sing. The gamecock clipped and armed for fight does the rising sun affright. Every wolf's and lion's howl raises from hell a human soul. The wild deer, wandering here and there, keeps the human soul from care. The lamb misused breeds public strife and yet forgives the butcher's knife. The bat that flits as close of eve, the blat that flits at close of eve has left the brain that won't believe. The owl that calls upon the night speaks the unbeliever's fright. He, sh- he who shall hurt the he who shall hurt the little wren shall never be beloved by men. He who the ox to wrath has moved shall never be by woman loved. The wanton boy that kills the fly shall feel the spider's enmity. Enmity. He who torments the Schaefer's sprite weaves a bower in endless night. The caterpillar on the leaf repeats to thee thy mother's grief. Kill not the moth nor butterfly, for the last judgment draweth nigh. He who shall train the horses to war shall never pass the polar bar. The beggar's dog and widow's cat, feed them, and thou wilt grow fat. The gnat that sings his summer song, poison gets from slander's tongue. The poison of the snake and newt is the sweat of envy's foot. The poison of the honey bee is the artist's jealousy. The prince's robes and beggar's rags are toadstools on the miser's bags. A truth that's told with bad intent beats all lies you can invent. It is right, it should be so. Man was made for joy and woe, and when this we rightly know, through the world we safely go. Joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. The babe is more than swaddling bands. Throughout all these human lands, tools were made and born were hands. Every farmer understands. Every tear from every eye becomes a babe in eternity. This is caught by females bright and returned to its own delight. The bleat, the bark, bellow, and roar are waves that beat on heaven's shore. The babe that weeps the rod beneath writes revenge in realms of death. The beggar's rags fluttering in air does to rags the heavens tear. The soldier armed with sword and gun, palsied strikes the summer sun. The poor man's farthing is worth more than all the gold on Afric's shore. One mite wrung from the laborer's hands shall buy and sell the miser's lands. Or, if protected from on high, does the whole nation sell and buy. He who mocks the infant's faith shall be mocked in age and death. He who shall teach the child to doubt, the rotting grave shall ne'er get out. He who respects the infant's faith triumphs over hell and death. The child's toys and the old man's reasons are the fruits of the two seasons. The questioner who sits so sly shall never know how to reply. He who replies to word of doubt doth put the light of knowledge out. The strongest poison ever known came from Caesar's laurel crown. Naught can deform the human race like to the armor's iron brace. When the gold and gems adorn the plough, to peaceful art shall envy bow. A riddle or the cricket's cry is the doubt a fit reply. The emmet's inch and eagle's mile make lame philosophy to smile. He who doubts from what he sees will ne'er believe to do what you please. If the sun and moon should doubt, they'd immediately go out. To be in a passion good may do, but no good if a passion is in you. The whore and gambler by the state license build the nation's fate. The harlot's cry from street to street shall weave old England's winding sheet. The winners shout, the losers curse, dance before dead England's hearse. Every night and every morn, some to misery are born. Every morn and every night, some are born to sweet delight. Some are born to sweet delight. Some are born to endless night. We are led to believe a lie when we see not through the eye, which was born in the night to perish in a night when the soul slept in beams of light. God appears, and God is light to those poor souls who dwell in night, but does a human form display to those who dwell in realms of day. Sweet Jesus, that's a long one. Wow, there's a lot of allegory and things packed away in
Yeah,
that bad boy.
yeah,
That's
it's not pretty dense conceptually. I mean, unsurprising for the poet, but even for him, it's
hmm
yeah.
I've read through this, and I gotta say my favorite lines. He who replies to words of doubt doth put the light of knowledge out. Those two lines are so delicious, like just incredible.
So before we get into too detailed of analysis of this one, whether we do or not, I just want to,
Mhm.
at this point, what I'd like to do is this. I have some notes here on the philosophies of William Blake, and I don't know how accurate this is. I'm not a professional. This is me learning. But anyways, I wanted to throw this out here. Some of it is corroborated by other people who are authorities on the subject. Some of it's my own musings. But I just wanted to get through this list to kind of just outwardly express some of my impressions of what his philosophical content was, and we'll move on from there. Whether we get back to that poem or move forward, and then we're going to have a swath of poems read after we get into that. So I've already mentioned stuff like exploitation and suffering and the context subcontext, the way he's like leaving a direct subject and a metaphor simultaneously with more than just two layers. I think it's not, I'm obvious, but I think it's tough to argue against those comments. He was considered an immaterialist by many. I'm not exactly sure why, to be perfectly honest. I don't know what people mean when they say that he was a subjective idealist, also known as immaterialism. I don't know why they say that exactly. If you guys could point out to me specific examples of how we could ascertain that, but somebody like George Berkeley, who argued, like getting into Platonic ideas about the ideal forms, the realm of ideas and the allegory of the cave, he was suggesting beyond materialism as supported by his student Aristotle that the real world is what's real and nothing else, other things simply don't exist. It's kind of like a mind body monism versus dualism type thing where you have the materialists and then the dualists. But then this guy's an immaterialist, which is really kind of bizarre in a sense that you're getting into mind body monism where the real world's the thing that doesn't exist and the realm of forms is the only real thing, which I think is a fascinating take. Apparently, people analyze his works and have concluded that he is a subjective idealist. That again suggests, which is leaning towards solipsism. But he wasn't a solipsist because he figured if you weren't looking at things and no one was, that it still existed because of this all-penetrating life force or like pantheistic God type thing. So that's part of why he was definitely a theist, aside from his uh, fascination with the Bible and concepts about Jesus. It just seems in abstract philosophical context, he had some logical arguments for there being an existence of God, which I find fascinating. Um, he seemed to be very pessimistic, sort of a critic of society, and not that we're all going to die, but kind of like at this rate, we're all going to die. And it kind of reminds me too of someone who followed up later, for Friedrich Nietzsche, and his perspectivism, as though some of the things that pained William Blake were then brought up by other poets and authors who took it a little differently and maybe took it somewhere else. But a lot of the main impetus behind his rage against what he sees seems to be shared by these individuals. He seemed to be very concerned with ethical behavior. Back to the suffering, exploitation, and pessimism. It's like he wasn't saying, it's not for nothing. He was trying to help people to do better. Symbolism, obviously, he likes symbolism a lot. It seems he was fascinated in cycles, as illustrated by the four seasons or the seasons. They're four separate poems. I'd like to hear Cordell read those relatively shortly. I don't know if I have them primed up for you. Maybe you want to look those up, Cordell. The seasons. He has four separate poems based on that,
Sounds good.
and I think that can illustrate his fascination with cycles and how they exist on metaphorical levels, like the echoing green. There's the beginning of the day, the middle of the day, the end of the day, the beginning of the season, the middle of the season, and the end of the season. There's the beginning of life, living it, and waning off into not being alive any longer. And again, the potential for all of humanity in that one. Uh, I don't know as much about this, but someone suggested that opposing forces and opposition seems to be, a theme of his work. And I was trying to figure out whether I had him for being an energy monist or dualist, in the sense that some people would think that all of the universe is made of the same thing. And when you see negative and positive, you're not looking at two different things, but different gradations of the same forces. I suspect that he is sort of like an energy monist in that way. I don't know, but it's the feeling I've gotten from it. Like things progressing from one state to another, you see the same thing in two different states and think that they're opposites because you're between them. He obviously really appreciated expression. It seemed as though he was into individualism and thought that the human spirit was indomitable and that expressing your own individual take was important. And again, I think that's what, getting into Nietzsche's perspectivism, who came later by a couple decades. Um, I think that there's some at least motivational similarities there, if not resulting similarities. He seemed to think that telling a story was important. I mean, look at his work. He wasn't just, he wasn't just saying things. He would say it within a context that he tried to make it well told. Um, oh, he talked about poetic genius. Like, the poetic genius was this thing about humanity that I think illustrated that indomitable spirit. Um, and then lastly, I suspect he was an egalitarian of sorts, meaning I don't know if he's exactly what I would call an egalitarian in the year 2020, but I think that given the reality he was born into, his rage against slavery and injustice against children, and his willingness to teach his illiterate wife to read and write, it might have been a lot of work to do so. Maybe it's just because he loved her, but I suspect it's because he thought that women deserved respect and fair treatment. So I deeply suspect he was either an actual egalitarian or one relatively compared to his time. So those are the notes I have on his specific philosophies. I want to throw to Cordell right now and ask if you think I really missed anything, if any of that was way off, or any thoughts on that analysis.
Oh, I actually totally agree. And for your question on why people say that he was like well, the thing is, I suspect that he was a very progressive man for his time, and probably talking more about social injustice than recognizing the present system as he knew it. So the thing is, I bet a lot of people must have spoken a lot of shit about him, like um, I imagine that he was taken to the most extreme. Like, people would have said about him that he was an atheist because he spoke about religion in a strange way, or that he was an anarchist because he spoke about social injustices. I could totally imagine that back in those days. And for the rest, I think you nailed it, honestly. The way I see it, he was born in that generation that was indeed the foundation of what we perceive as egalitarianism.
Well, I personally, being an egalitarian and a fan of philosophy, I think I have a tendency to project this onto stuff, so it's hard for me to tell. With the example of Socrates, I don't know if he ever owned any slaves, and then he seemed to speak out against certain injustices and also spoke about the strength and competence of women and how they should be educated. And based on these, I know we only have a third of the works of the only dude who wrote about him, being Plato. It's like we don't know a lot about Socrates, but what we do know, I would say, supports him having some level of egalitarianism. Again, at least compared to the times he's in, and it's hard for me to tell sometimes if that's just my own wishful thinking or an obvious reality within the work. But yeah, it's kind of how I perceive it.
I think you're right, because to be honest, the, the ideas of egalitarianism is something that's forever evolving. I mean, not all of the injustice that exist we still see. We don't see them all. Like, we mentioned the most obvious ones, like unfair treatments to kids, unfair treatments to minorities, and stuff like that. But there must be thousands of stories that we don't hear about because they less than minorities, or less than important because, I don't know, perhaps we have different values or um, priorities in our life and system.
Mm-hmm. Vexing Cat, did you have any input on either the philosophies I stated, anything tangentially related, other philosophers, things missing, something overstated?
I don't think anything at this point has been overstated. Realistically, I don't know. Philosophy is my weak point. That's I'm here. I try and I do the best I can. I interpret as best I can for philosophy. Uh, So I mean, it's almost like getting washed over by an ocean of knowledge, and so it's hard to like sieve through that for the stuff that is relevant to me.
Right.
Um,
On that
hmm.
tip, I'll take just a brief moment to explain one of my opinions about that. A meta conversation. I think that people's personal ponderings carry as much, if not more, weight than anything. Meaning, your perception of reality and how you take it. Maybe there's some terms that you have misdefined and then used to describe it, and then that philosophy is wrong. I guess there's some moments that you could be quote unquote wrong, but ultimately, philosophy in ancient Greek came from this concept of a love of knowledge. And yeah, it means things different than that pragmatically, but I think that's still an important thing to remember, that it's really just about, like, you care about poetry. I know you do. You read it so well, have such a nice voice, but ultimately I realize that you're interested in it and have your own sort of standards, moral, ethical standards, which get applied to it. And then you take something from it. So your impressions, no matter how technically in irrelevant to, however irrelevant your opinions might be to technical philosophical jargon, that doesn't really matter to me. Like, how you take it and how you feel about it seems important anyway. So that's sort of why I don't mind asking anyone about what they think about a specific poet philosophically. If they pick up anything from it, and it's art too. There's synthesis, meaning he could have put one thing in and you could take out another. I find it to just be a fascinating element of art, and I guess poesis, and taking something that didn't exist and then making something that does exist, and what that is as it exists to you might be different than to the author and myself. Basically, there are no wrong answers.
As you say, John. I do have a couple more of his poems locked in, loaded if you want me to read them.
Yes.
Let's see. First is Song My Silks in Fine Array by William Blake. My silks in fine array, my smiles in languished air, by love are driven away, and mournful lean despair. Brings me you to deck my grave, such end true lovers have. His face is fair as heaven, when springing buds unfold. Oh, why to him wasn't given, whose heart is wintry cold? His breast is love's all worshipped tomb, where all love's pilgrims come. Bring me an axe and spade, bring me a winding sheet. When I my grave have made, let winds and tempests beat. Then down I'll lie as cold as clay, true love doth pass away. A little bit sad. Let's see. The next one I've got is Silent, Silent Night by William Blake. Silent, silent night, quench the holy light of thy torches bright. For possessed of day, a thousand spirits stray that sweet joys betray. Why should joys be sweet, used with deceit, nor with sorrows meet, but an honest joy does itself destroy for a harlot coy? He really wasn't into prostitution very much, was he? It's just like an
Yeah.
honest joy of love and passion and sex, and it is broken and like deceitful for a harlot.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that. I hadn't really thought of his take on prostitution, but I was grokking to his willingness to, like, carnal pleasures, that it seems as though he was totally okay with people expressing themselves and loving each other. I think that's why the hippies like them so much. But basically, free expressions of love and to be a passionate sexual person seem to be a-okay with him, and then the exploitations of economics seem horrifying to him, and you combine the two and you have women giving up sex for money because they're being exploited by circumstance. And I mean, honestly, you sort of end up with sort of my own reactions to the sex work industry, where on an individualistic level, I absolutely respect prostitutes and think that they are wonderful people who deserve respect and support and kindness in every level. But the idea that something is as beautiful as expression of sexual passion would be reduced to a monetary transaction that includes exploitation is just depressing. And I'm not certain, but I feel as though that he might have been right in there, like along all those lines. You know, that the sex is fine and that the economy's not, and the combination of the two is particularly horrifying.
Yeah. Well, it's not like women were afforded that many opportunities for business in the late 1700s and early 1800s.
Hmm.
Um, let's see.
I
I
think
think
he
Cordell had the
was.
seasons ready to go.
Oh, go for
I
it,
think
Cordell.
it's a series of 4 poems. I'm not even sure how long they are. Is it reasonable length there, Cordell? I don't know.
That I've seen, yeah. I've
Yeah.
given them a
Mhm.
short read. I think I can probably do it in twice because it's basically three stanzas by
Yeah.
season.
Just let's read one at a
Three or four.
time and do a brief analysis after each one. And before reading, I want to just mention to people the reason that this one's brought up at this time in the program is because we just ran through some analysis of his philosophies, and basically there's this fourfold thing. Somebody noticed, I think, after he was dead, he's like, "Hey, maybe this thing about four and the whole directions with the cardinal directions, north, south, east, west." And it seems as though he puts in potentially four metaphorical layers into a lot of his work. Um, Basically the cyclical nature of things seems to be a real theme for him with different opposing forces, and if I'm not mistaken, this set of poems helps to illustrate all of that stuff. So that's why it's so poignant to the conversation at this point. Cordell, whenever you're ready.
Okay, sounds good. So, I had muted myself, I didn't see. So, um, To Spring by William Blake. O thou with dewy locks, who lookest down through the clear window of the morning, turn thine angel eyes upon O western isle, which in full core hails thy approach, O spring! The hills tell each other, and the listening valleys hear. All our longing eyes are turned up, and thy bright pavilion's issues forth, and let thy holy feet visit or climb. Come over the eastern hills, and let our winds kiss thy perfumed garment. Let us taste thy morn and evening breath. Scatter thy pearls upon our love-sick land that mourns for thee. Oh, deck her forth with thy fair finger, pour thy soft kisses on her bosom, and put thy golden crown upon her languished head, whose modest dresses were bound up for ye. That's it. That was Spring.
That's the first one, right?
Yes, it's amazing.
And is it titled Spring?
Yeah, it's called To Spring. To me, it sounds like an ode to spring, but it's called To Spring.
I don't know if this is a testament to his pessimism or not, but I've noticed different artists that get into the cycle of life seem to end with birth, and he seems to like to end with death. It's funny. He starts with spring. I get the feeling towards the end of this, it's going to end up in a conceptual ditch where we all die or whatever. And it's like almost like through that cycle, some people might say, you know, you start with death and then end up with birth because it's all connects into this big circle anyways, but it seems to be like a more optimistic take, and his pessimism may be shown with his choice of where to start in any given cycle. It's just a thought.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's part of his melancholic approach to poetry. There is a certain form of melancholy which is actually even more uh, enhanced by this approach of ending with death at the end.
Well, it's also fitting to our very existence, right? I mean, if you see the overarching cyclical nature of things and choose to mix it up and talk about birth at the end, fine. But I mean, you're born first and die last. So I mean, you know, um,
Yeah. To be honest, okay, I'm gonna sound like a pessimist, a total pessimist, but I do think that on a fundamental level, okay, rebirth is something seasonal, indeed, but on a fundamental philosophical level, it's not that way that it goes. It's more like, to me, it's more like entropy, like the science that tells us that, you're born young, you grow, then you reach some type of apogee, and then you go down the hill. And I suspect a lot of poets try to communicate that idea.
I noticed Peaches and Cream said, "Death reminds us to live." And while I agree with that sentiment, just to be a little bit semantically annoying, I wrote in, "Death is merely evidence of life," meaning that, like, you could talk about lifelessness, like lack of life, sure, but death itself is simply a part of the process of life. It's like, um, I don't know. Death seems to be actually not a thing to me. It's sort of like talking about cold. It's like there's heat and lack of heat. There's no such thing as coldness, except in relative nature to the amount of heat that you require to be okay, or whatever. You know, liquid water might see something else as cold because it would freeze it, but literally it's just some heat, more heat. You know, there is no cold, just like there is no death. It's simply life and the end of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that statement, and it even goes further. I think there is a lot of abstraction in the what we conceptualize of that. Like, first of all, nobody can say what that is. Like, they never. It's not that nobody can say, but nobody finds the word to describe that, and it makes everybody very uncomfortable. And when they do, usually we end up talking about doctrines and religions, which shouldn't really be the best description of that, because it's something else. It takes the conversation of what is that away from what is that.
Did you have summer primed?
Yeah, I have them here, all of them, the four. So,
I'm ready.
to summer, O thou who passest through valleys, in thy strength curb thy fiercest steed, alley to. No, sorry, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm gonna start again this.
It's fine.
O thou who passest through our valleys, in thy strength curb thy fierce steeds, allay the heat that flames from thy large nostril. Thou, O summer, oft pitchest here thy golden tent, and oft beneath our oaks hast slept, while we beheld with joy thy ruddy limbs of flourishing hair. Beneath our thickest shades we oft have heard thy voice, when noon upon his fervid car rode over the deep of heaven. Beside our springs sit down, and in our mossy valleys, on some bank beside a river clear, throw thy silk draperies off, and rush into the stream. O valleys love the summer in his pride. O bards are farmed who strike the silver wire. O youths are bolder than the southern swains. O maidens fair in the sprightly stands. We lack not songs, nor instrument of joy, nor echoes sweet, nor waters clear as heaven, nor laurel wreaths against the sultry heat. Okay, I'm sorry for the stutter. This one was pretty hard to read, actually.
It's just fine.
It's beautiful, though. It's
Here,
like,
send me the poem. I want to take a look at it,
yeah, I
or just
posted
put
it.
it in our chat
Yeah, I'm gonna put it in both places. There we go. Perhaps you can read the next two ones if you want, or one of them.
here. Oh, whatever.
Or if you want, I can keep on doing it, but yeah.
I'll tell you what. Let's just do a brief analysis here, and then I'm going to read Summer again, and I'd like you to go ahead and read Autumn. But Vexing, did you have any input on either Spring or Summer? Any thoughts?
No, both were beautifully read and beautiful seasons. So, Cordell, don't be so hard on yourself. You did a wonderful reading.
Thank you, Vex.
Here, I'm going to give a shot at the Summer one real quick. Let's see. To Summer. O thou who passest thou our valleys in, thy strength curb thy fierce steeds, allay the heat that flames from their large nostrils. Thou, O Summer, oft pitchest here my golden tent, and oft beneath our oaks hast slept, while we beheld with joy thy ruddy limbs and flourishing hair. Beneath our thickest shades we oft have heard thy voice, when noon upon his fervid car rode o'er the deep of heaven, beside our springs. Sit down in our mossy valleys, on some bank besides a river clear, throw thy silk draperies off, and rush into the stream. Our valleys love the summer in his pride. Our bards are famed who'd strike the river wire. Our youth are bolder than the southern swains. Our maidens fair in the sprightly dance. We lack not songs, nor instruments of joy, nor echoes sweet, nor waters clear as heaven, nor laurel wreaths against thy sultry heat.
It's beautiful. I thank you for reading it because it was pretty hard for me to actually comprehend everything while I was
It's
reading it
got
myself.
some rough words in it, like just weird juxtaposition of terms that like we wouldn't say in modern times.
Yeah.
I mean, famed. He was saying fam before it was cool, fam.
Yeah.
Oh, where are the D? That's not that weird. There was one in there that was just, pitched, pitch ed. Like, what does that even mean? Pitched,
I think it's like the tent that's being pitched on the floor, like on the ground.
pitched. It's almost like pitch ed is there, and I don't know why he's got the st on it. It's like, is he trying to turn a verb into a noun back into a verb or so? I don't get it. I don't understand what that is meant. Maybe it's something linguistic or has to do with the rhyme or the flow.
No, no,
Oft pitched,
I,
here thy golden tent pitchest. You did you the act of pitching. Oft pitching here. Yeah, it's almost like he's trying to say pitching, like a present tense of pitch ed. That it seems like an infinite. He's trying to take pitched and turn it into an infinite tense, and did it in such a way that's so awkward to my modern mind that maybe back in that old English days that would have been a perfectly reasonable way to do it. I can't tell, but it's just odd.
I love your views, blocks. Thank you. Actually, I love it.
Yeah. Well, moving on. You want to take a stab at Autumn there, Cordell?
Yes, for sure, for sure. Okay, let's see. Autumn. To autumn. Oh, autumn, laden with fruits and stained with the blood of the grape, pass not, but sit beneath my shady roof. There thou mayst rest, and tune thy jolly voice to my fresh pipe, and all the daughters of the years shall dance, sing now the lusty song of fruits and flowers. The narrow bud opens her beauty to the sun, and love runs in her thrilling veins. Blossom hang round the browns of morning, and flourish down the bright cheek of modest eve, till clustering summer breaks forth into singing, and feathered clouds strew flowers round her head. The spirits of the air live on the smells of fruit, and joy, with pinions light, roves round the gardens, or sits singing in the trees. Thus sang the jolly autumn as he sat. Then Rose girded himself, and over the bleak hills fled from her sight, but left his golden load. Oh wow. I really like the metaphors of his poems. It's amazing. Like the colors to me, it's so visual. Like with the blood of the grapes, I'm already seeing like the colors just like that. And then the ending even left his golden load. I can literally see the golden load being the leaves of the tree. So funny.
I feel like it's not incidental or accidental. I don't know how meaningful, but I feel like it's intentional that spring had four stanzas, summer and autumn have three, and winter has four. I feel like that was not an accident.
Probably wasn't. And even if it was, the subconscious mind of people tend to do things in some organization way.
This is a total guess, but I wonder if there's like metaphorical layers in each one, and he's cluing you in that there's like four layers to the four stanza ones and three layers to the three.
Hmm.
I don't know.
He would be meta before his time.
For real.
Uh, so I've got two more poems. Well, I've got four, but I'll read. I've got London and The Little Vagabond,
In
as
just a
well as,
in
yes,
just a moment, we have one more poem to read from this set of four
The
first.
Winter.
Um,
Yeah.
any thoughts on Autumn from Uvex?
No, nothing in particular. It's such a joy to listen to them read.
I think having read the summer again, I think it's fine. I'm just gonna go ahead and read Autumn myself, just for more, so we can get into it a little like deeper. It's fresh in your mind from him reading it, and well, I think this is an interesting practice. We'll see if we're killing anyone with it. I'm gonna go ahead and read Autumn myself, and then we'll do Winter. To Autumn, O Autumn, laden with fruit and stained with the blood of the grape, pass not, but sit beneath my shady roof. There thou mayest rest, and tune thy jolly voice to my fresh pipe, and all the daughters of the year shall dance. Sing now the lusty song of fruits and flowers. The narrow bud opens her beauties to the sun, and love runs in her thrilling veins. Blossoms hang round the brows of morning, and flourish down the bright cheek of modest eve, till clustering summer breaks forth into singing, and feathered clouds strew flowers round her head. The spirits of the air live on the smells of fruit and joy, with pinions light, roves round the gardens, or sit singing in the trees. Thus sang the jolly autumn as he sat, then rose, girded himself, and o'er the bleak hills fled from our sight, but left his golden load. Oh, definitely, Cordell left his golden load. That's like, so Autumn showed up and kind of like partied for summer, like said, "Oh, this the whole summer thing is good. Like you guys did good. Let's party with it." And I'm gonna beat it. And he left behind like his footprints, which was um all the brownery, the brown um foliage, the golden like leaves in particular, but everything. Uh, yeah, definitely.
This poem, I feel, is not
So
so
he's
metaphor.
personified
Yeah.
all of these. It seems. They're like he's made each individual season into a character that's somewhat godlike, a deification almost. Um, kind of like, yeah, it's like it might be in jest and lighthearted, but it's almost like a mythological sort of take on the metaphorical realities that face us.
Well, it's what I was gonna tell you. It doesn't. Well, there is clearly metaphors, but at the same time, it feels more like a sort of description with an artistic language rather than, like a metaphorical message hidden beneath a symbolism.
That's I've said it a few times today. I'm gonna say it again. That's what I think I love about his work that I'm finding. I think it's both. I think it's a literal, descriptive, plain, mundane reality that is literally autumn, and then it's inferring to the waning of anything, like the golden years of someone's life, whatever. It's like not just a metaphor, and it's not a metaphor. As far as I can tell, it's literally both.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing work that he did, to be honest. My only regret is that he wasn't immortal to just keep on writing over the centuries.
That
Yeah, we haven't really quite figured that one out yet.
Should I finish up with Winter so I can leave Vex reading the poems, or should you go, Vex?
No, I think if we're going to do the 4 seasons, we need to do
Okay.
all
yeah, it's
4
time for winter.
seasons.
You want to read that one, Cordell?
Yes, of course, I'll finish up with that one then. To Winter. Oh, Winter, bar thine adamantine door. The north is thine, there hast thou built thy ark, deep founded habitation. Shake not thy roofs, nor bend thy pillar with thine iron car. He hears me not, but over the yawning deep rides heavy. His storms are unchained, sheathed in ribbed steel. I dare not lift my eyes, no, for he had reared his scepter over the world. Lo, now does the direful monster, whose skin clings to his strong bones, strides over the groaning rocks. He withers all in silence, and his hand unclothes the earth and freezes up frail life. He takes his seat upon the cliffs. The mariner cries in vain, poor little wretch, that dealst with storms, till heaven smiles and the monster is driven yelling to his cave beneath Mount Ekla. I forget that those
Well,
are poems when I read them.
I saw this coming, but it's not like he's pissed, but it's like it starts so sweet in the end. He's just we're gonna die, so it's going bad.
Yeah.
So, the storms unchained, rib steel. He's like, I dare not lift my eyes. He's just like direful monster, groaning rocks. Like he withers all in silence. It's like freezes up frail life. It's like literally. It's just at that point he's like he's like, I set it up, time to break it. So we made stuff, kill it.
Sorry, I'm
Poor little wretch.
Yeah. I think Kulkidan would like to share a poem with us.
And then he makes a reference at the end. He says, "Till heaven smiles," and the monster is driven yelling to his caves beneath Mount Helka, meaning that eventually the monster of winter will be driven back to see spring again. So it's looking forward, but not. It's like just referencing to that inevitable reality of, he won't rule forever, but he has his day, and it's winter. It's bad.
Yeah, it sounded very much like that actually. Like even him Winter going back to his cave didn't sound hopeful at all. It sounded more like, yeah, it's gonna happen, but before it happens,
Yeah, it's bad now, and also once he's gone, he's probably coming back. It's like, yeah.
I love it. I love it. There is a form of pessimism in William Blake. Like, there is a form of pessimism, and at the same time, I would say his irony to it is both beautiful and almost ironical, like funny, almost. I
Yeah.
mean,
Like
almost.
like he's cynical, but then cynical about his own cynicism.
Yeah, yeah.
Here, you know what? We've been rereading these. I'm gonna go ahead and run through the winter one more time, then we'll get on to what to Vexing's prepared to read. But I want to give this one another reading, so we're gonna just go through the same one more time. To winter. O winter, bar thine adamantine doors. The north is thine. There hast thou built thy dark, deep-founded habitation. Shake not thy roofs, nor bend thy pillars with thine iron car. He hears me not, but o'er the yawning deep rides heavy, his storms are unchained. Sheathed in ribbed steel, I dare not lift mine eyes, for he hath reared his scepter o'er the world. Lo, now the direful monster, whose skin clings to his strong bones, strides o'er the groaning rocks. He withers all in silence, and his hand unclothes the earth and freezes up frail life. He takes his seat upon the cliffs. The mariner cries in vain. Poor little wretch that dealst with storms till heaven smiles, and the monster is driven yelling to his caves beneath Mount Hecla. Yeah, I mean it's obviously a poem, but it's a story. It's like a really brief epic. It's great. You're right. I forget it's poetry sometimes. All right. Very good. Vaccine, did you have any analytical points before we move on to some other content?
No, you both did a fantastic job. Thank you for reading.
All right. Apparently, you have a couple prepared for reading, and I just want to take a brief moment to encourage the audience to participate through the text chat here in the stream. Suggest any poems, offer up any philosophical analysis, or even suggestions for future episodes are welcome. We're going to be doing this every week. The stream begins at 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, so you're gonna have to figure out where you're on the planet and how that relates to your own time zone. For me, in Pacific time, it starts at noon. That said, thank you for being here. We are promoting a single charity this week. It is through the Humble Bundle website. There is a package of games where you get really good value on games, and all the money goes to charity. The specific charity being the Australian wildfires. We could have put something more comprehensive together. This is not a self promotion. We're not affiliated. It's literally just me trying to advocate a specific charity. Each week it'll be a different one. This week it's the Australian wildfires as through Humble Bundles wildfire bundle, where you get really good value on games. It promotes those game studios, and all the money goes to charity. You can write it off. It's basically a win-win-win. Thank you all for being here. Right now, we're going to move on to a couple of poems read by Vexing Cat.
Thank you. One second, John. Let me grab the first one. So I've got a few. I've got The Vagabond, London, um, The Muses, and The Clod and the Pebble. So I'm going to start with London by William Blake. I wander through each charted street, near where the charted Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry. Every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's terror and blights with plagues the marriage hearse.
Did that lag out for you as well, Cordell, or just me? It could have been my internet, but assuming that it lagged for everyone,
Read it again.
It was good for me, but you can read it again. It's always.
Oh no, if
Okay.
it was just my side, then that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
I missed about half of it, but that's okay. Any thoughts on that one, guys? And it's okay if it's not particularly relating to the philosophy, but being this section of the show where we just went over the philosophies, any particular philosophical analysis is encouraged, but anything have to do with like the meter or style or period, anything. Any thoughts on?
Well, um, no thoughts,
No, I
but
think
I received
it pretty speaks for itself. I mean, he's talking about London. He references the Thames and the faces of the people, and it talks about the very nature of London, like when the streets ran blood with soldiers, blood down palace walls. He talks about harlots in the street cursing, and infants, screaming into the night, and the plagues and blights that have plagued London. It's pretty interesting poem. It's pretty accurate, really.
Philosophically, I have no real comment, but politically, I
Hmm.
sense just absolute indignant rage. Like he's pissed. In Cry of Every Man, in every infant's cry of fear, I hear every voice in every band, the mind forged manacles I hear. He's literally saying these people live in psychic chains and they're suffering from it. And then the chimney sweeper, the other poems we read, and then we got into that for a second. It's not subtle. He's like, the blackening church appalls. It's like, yeah, the hapless soldiers sigh, run in blood down palace walls. He's saying that the palace walls themselves are built by the suffering of the soldiers who paid their lives for it, and it's wrong. I mean, it seems quite obvious that he's pissed about the inequities of society and how those that are supposed to be helped by this are the ones paying for it, and the ones who are being helped by it are basically nowhere to be seen. Yeah, what's a marriage hearse?
I just got a poem actually from one of the
A,
viewers.
a limo? I I don't know.
Well, no, it's like but most through midnight streets I hear he's like, oh, youthful harlot's curse. So there's these youthful harlots cursing is basically like the young women being just totally abandoned by society, and then they're suffering, and so now they cry out their suffering, which blasts the newborn infant's tear, like where like the babies are crying, like this whore is mad and has a crying baby, and it's just all so sad to him, and it's like, yeah, it just this poem in particular seems to represent absolute disgust with the nature of society and the condition it's found itself in, and him just realizing that people are being made more sad and more weak by the nature of the society around them, and he just wants to see something different happen.
I just got a poem from, well, actually, it's the lyrics of a song from one of the viewers.
Hmm.
Should I read it now? Would that be okay with you guys?
Yeah, this is an original from one of the audience.
No, I think it's a traditional poem from Australia.
Oh,
It's
okay.
called
Well,
What's Waltzing Matilda. I guess it's been played in music. Also, like I can see that. Wait, here I have the Wikipedia page. So basically, it's a folkloric song from Australia, one of the most famous one. And it was suggested to become the national anthem, and is actually often recognized by, yeah,
Waltzing
yeah,
Matilda.
yeah. Okay, should I read it, or does any one of you
Yes,
guys read it?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay, so let's see. I don't
I want
know
to
the rhythm
encourage
of it,
audience
so
participation. I'm glad that people are offering up something, and I mean, this is the first suggestion. Of course, we're going to do it, and then just in general, we can't necessarily, assuming everybody's in there clamoring for stuff, we're going to have to do what we do. But that said, I would like to encourage participation like this. I really appreciate you offering something up. Cool, Caden 06. But yeah, we'll let's do it.
Okay, so waltzing Matilda. Once a jolly swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of Coolibah tree. He sang as he watched and waited till his belly boiled. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. He sang as he watched and waited till his belly boiled. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Down came a jumpunk to drink at the billabong. Up jumped a swag man and grabbed him with glee. He sang as he shoved that jumpunk in his tucker back. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. He sang and he shoved that jumbuck in his tucker back. You'll come waltzing with me. You'll come waltzing Matilda with me. He sang as he shoved that jumbuck in his tucker back. Up rode the squatter, mounted on his thoroughbred. Up rode the troopers, 1, 2, 3, with the jolly jumbuck you've got in your tucker bag. You'll come waltzing Matilda with me. You'll come waltzing Matilda with me. With the jolly jumbuck you've got in your tucker bag. You'll come a waltzing Matilda, you scoundrel with me. Up jumped the swagman and sprang into Billabong. You'll never catch me alive, said he, and his ghost may be heard as you pass by that Billabong. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. His ghost may be heard as you pass by that Billabong. You'll come waltzing Matilda with me. That was cute. Okay.
Well, it's obviously a song, right? Like this, the repetition in it clearly indicates it's meant to be put to music. I mean,
Yes.
I would say. Well, cool, Caden. I don't understand some of this. I assume a jumbuck is a buck of some particular species of animal I'm not super familiar with, but that seems. Yeah, Swagman. I don't know that one. Billy boiled. Is that like until his like head gets sunburned or his stomach gets burned? Till his Billy boiled. Yeah, I don't know that one either. But anyway.
I'm gonna quickly go grab a cup of tea. I'm leaving you in charge, guys.
Fantastic. Got this one. All right. So oh gosh, it's already 2:30 here in California. So the intent of this stream is to be 2 hours long from noon to 2 where I'm at, or 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time until 10. I believe it's 10:30 Greenwich Mean Time now. So like a minimum 2, maximum 3. We're about 2.5 hours in. We've kind of gotten there. I want to just make sure if the audience wanted William Blake that they had a chance to request. I think I'm going to actually read a longer one to finish this off. A Prophecy, a Europe, a Prophecy by William Blake. It's a bit of a longer piece, but it's not too long. It's just probably going to take at least 10 minutes to read. And I wanted to make sure if there was any other content people wanted to request or discussion to be had that we got a chance at it. Oh, Jumbuck's a sheep. Nice. Later, cool Caden. So, Vexing, were there any other poems that we had prepared for today that haven't been gotten to that are worth mentioning?
I've got a few. I mean, he was a rather prolific writer, so I'll just hit them here. So we've got The Little Vagabond, The Book of Thel, and To the Muses. So I'll
Did we
start
get
with
through Earth's answer today already?
I do believe that Cordell read Earth's answer.
Lovely. And then two tangentially related poems I wanted to read today. Um, Wadsworth Longfellow wrote a poem called Aftermath I thought was worth mentioning just sort of tangentially. And then because of his passion for, human uh, human enjoyment and individualism and stuff, I feel as though just reading a simple Voltaire poem would be nice. I had picked out The Origin of Trades. So I was thinking of reading both of those. And then you got a couple you wanted to read through. And then we're going to finish up with this rather long reading of a prophecy. So how about this? I'll go ahead and read the Voltaire right now. Then we'll get into the ones that you wanted to read. And then Cordell, I see you're back now. So if you wanted to read any more poetry, we're about 2.5 hours into this. So this is about the end. I mean, I think we're going to cover the full 3 hours, but we're running out of time here. If there's anything you wanted to get into this stream/podcast, now's the time to do it. Make sure, go ahead and research that. I am going to go ahead and read this Voltaire poem. Again, the reason I'm bringing him up, I'd say philosophically, there was a lot of divergence between him and Blake, but there was also a lot of similarity, and certain politically, and the way that it resulted in him advocating for individuals expressing themselves and being individuals and enjoying life. This is The Origins of Trade by Voltaire. When with a skillful hand Prometheus made a state that the human form displayed, Pandora, his own work, to wed he chose, and from those two the human race arose. When first to know herself the fair began, she played her smiles enchantment upon man. By softness and alluring speech she gained the ascendant, and her master soon enchained. Her beauty on Prometheus's senses ne'er palled, and the first husband was the first enthralled. The god of war soon saw the new formed fair, his manly beauty and his martial air, his golden casque and all his glittering arms. Pandora pleased, and he enjoyed her charms. When the sea's ruler in his humid court had heard of this intrigue from fame's report, the fair he sought, like a reception found, a Neptune fail, could Neptune fail where Mars a triumph found? Days light-haired god from his resplendent height their pleasures saw and hoped the same delight. He could not to refuse him have the heart, who o'er the day presides and every art. Mercury with eloquence declared his flame, and in his turn he triumphed o'er the dame. Squalid and sooty from his forge, at first Vulcan was ill received and gave disgust. But he by importunity obtained what other gods with so much ease had gained. Pandora's prime thus winged with pleasure flew, then she in languor lived, nor wherefore knew. She that devotes to love her life's first spring, as years increase can do no other thing, for e'en to gods inconsistency is known, and those who dwell in heaven to change are prone. Pandora of her favors had been free to gods who left her, happening then to see a satyr who through plains and meadows strayed, smite with his mien she love's advances made. To these amours our race existence owes, from such amusement all mankind arose. Hence those varieties in talent spring, in genius, passions, businesses, everything. To Vulcan one, to Mars one's owes his birth. This to a satyr, very few on earth claim any kindred with the god of day, few that celestial origin display. From parents each his taste and turn derives, but most of all trades now Pandora's thrives. The most delightful, though least rare it seems, and it's the trade all Paris most esteems. So outside of politics and philosophy, I'd like to also mention, I believe it's because he's a romance poet, but the same thing we mentioned about the meter and style being so rigid. I mean, it's like this kind of almost dancing around feeling. Da, 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 ba, ba, da,
Hmm.
da, da, da. It's like it's so tropey in its meter, it almost hurts. And that's one thing I love about Voltaire and now Blake, upon having learned more about it, is that there's this juxtaposition of utter simplicity and rigidness to this form where you're like, oh, this just sounds like, crappy children's stuff or something. I don't know, just like too organized and simplistic. And then you like look into it and it's like uh crazy mess of ideas with stuff all over the place and real meaning and just like all of humanity kind of in there, and you're like, wow, it's not it's not dainty and trite at all.
Mm.
Mhm. And then there's some other stuff in here. He's talking about ingenious passions, business, everything. Like the way he's talking about humans expressing themselves in complicated and beautiful ways is basically what makes us human. I would say it's painfully obvious that they're both humanists, like at least in some sense of the term. So
Mm.
there you go. Um,
Hmm.
how about the Longfellow? Should I just read that now?
Yeah, go ahead. Go for it.
Hmm. Yeah, this is brief anyway. So this is a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who I think is just a somewhat relevant poet to Blake, but perhaps not obviously so. I'll just read this. When the summer fields are mown, when the birds are fledged and flown, and the dry leaves strew the path, with the falling of the snow, with the cawing of the crow, once again the fields we mow, and gather in the aftermath. Not the sweet, new grass with flowers, in this harvesting of ours, not the upland clover bloom, but the rowan mixed with weeds, tangled tufts from marsh and meads, where the poppy drops its seeds, in the silence and the gloom. Upon reading that poem, I decided it had a certain indignant rage and pessimism and metaphor and almost cyclical nature, much like Blake's work. I saw in a list of related poets to Blake, Longfellow, and somebody was like, "Oh, he's the man." And I started looking through stuff. I thought it was a relevant poem. I don't know to what extent, but there you go.
Mm.
Vexing.
Yep.
Thanks for
Ready,
sharing, by the
ready
way.
whenever you are.
And how?
And how? Okay. So let's read. Let's read the Book of Thel. Oh, that's a bit of a long one.
Oh yeah, you don't want to read that one. I'm gonna read another really long thing after all this, so I don't think. Yeah, that
I'll
I
read
tried
these
reading
two.
that recently, and like about halfway through, I was like, "What am I doing?"
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and read then the short ones here.
While she's reading, Cordell, maybe you want to prepare another poem to read, whether it's an original of yours or another poet or just more Blake. We're coming towards the end of this, though. She's going to read a few, and then you'll get the floor from it, and then I'm going to go ahead and close out with that Europe, a prophecy.
I've got a couple of original poems I'd like to share before we finish this stream.
Makes sense. Okay. Let me go ahead and read To the Muses. To the Muses by William Blake. Whether on Ida's shady brow, or in the chambers of the east, the chambers of the sun that now from ancient melody hath ceased, whether in heaven ye wander fair, or the green corners of the earth, or the blue regions of the air where the melodious winds have birth, whether on crystal rocks ye rove beneath the bosom of the sea, wandering in many a coral grove, fair Nine forsaking poetry. How have you left the ancient love that bards of old enjoyed in you? The languid strings do scarcely move, the sound is forced, the notes are few. Yeah. I do quite literally think he's beseeching the muses. He's asking them to come back, to inspire in man the joy and poetry in the words given form and flight. He is asking them to come back because they are the daughters of the sea.
This is actually
And
one of my favorite poems of his. Thank you. I liked it a lot. If
Will you actually read that one again, Vexing?
sure, I don't know what you've done to your mic, but it's dramatically different. But I'll read it again.
It's yeah, I know. Is it louder or is it just weird?
Exponentially.
Oh, sorry.
To the Muses by William Blake. Whether on Ida's shady brow, or in the chambers of the East, the chambers of the sun that now from ancient melody have ceased, whether in heaven ye wander fair, or the green corners of the earth, or the blue regions of the air where the melodious winds have, whether on crystal rocks ye rove beneath the bosom of the sea, wandering in many a coral grove, fair Nine, forsaking poetry. How have you left the ancient love the bards of old enjoyed in you? The languid strings do scarcely move, the sound is forced, the notes are few.
amazing.
Mm. That might be my second favorite poem by William Blake.
It's great. Thank you.
The next one I have is called The Little Vagabond by William Blake. Dear mother, the church is cold, but the alehouse is healthy and pleasant and warm. Besides, I can tell where I'm used as well. Such usage in heaven will never do well. But, but if at the church they would give us some ale and a pleasant fire, our souls to regale, we'd sing and we'd pray all the livelong day, nor ever once wish from the church to stray. Then the parson might preach and drink and sing, and we'd be as happy as birds in the spring. And modest Dame Lurch, who is always at church, would not have a bandy children, nor fasting, nor birch. And God, like a father rejoicing to see his children as pleasant and happy as he, would have no more quarrel with the devil or the barrel, but kiss him and give him both drink and apparel. So instead of going to church, they're all going to the alehouse. But if you were serving ale and singing and being merry in church, of course all of those sinners would be in church. That's
I
that
think
is
he's
funny.
saying that if organized religion admitted how humans really are, they'd have more success.
That's possible. If they admit their faults and embrace them rather than shun them, perhaps they
I
wouldn't
think
be
he's
so.
saying that singing and being merry isn't exactly a fault.
Yeah.
like like beer or no.
Hmm.
It was a funny poem, this one, I gotta say.
Yeah.
What year was Hume alive? I feel like, oh, okay. So he was earlier than this guy. It's almost like, hmm. I wonder what this guy thought about Descartes. Yeah. I feel like the I feel like if you look at some of the concepts of the immaterialism as they apply to Descartes, and then just basically, okay, so what I mean is, I saw David Hume talk shit about Descartes basically being kind of um Im not unhuman or inhumane, but like lack of respect for humanism, where he's like kind of expecting some sort of mechanical, perfunctory nature of people when they're just people and you can look at how they are. And I sense some similar criticism in this, where it's like he might agree with some of Descartes' like solipsistic musings about the nature of reality and our perception of it, but at the same time, where he takes it to and how people should influence each other and tolerate each other, it it's like he's pissed about the same things Hume was, and he kind of took it a different way in his surmising of reality. But he didn't take it. He took it a different way in how he surmised reality, but he took it in the same way that Hume did, insofar as how you should treat and respect people and just have a good time and be nice and share very human and pleasant things.
Well, I think that there is an interesting point that you're putting the light on is that art isn't really ever original. It's continued. I mean, basically every artist probably knows that, but without the pillars of other artists before him or her, there is it's really hard to find inspiration. People need the techniques of predecessors and the topics of predecessors, even if the intake will be different.
Wise words, Cordell. Definitely, somebody wrote something that inspired someone else to write something, and it's like paying it forward, and just exponentially.
Yeah.
Every
Totally.
artist, every poet, every musician, every creative type person creates something. And even if that one little speck of something doesn't become known or huge or important to the rest of society, it inspires someone else that is equally creative, and they create something great. So keep making, keep creating, keep giving back to society the joy and love and passion that you have and you are inspired by, and it'll just continue to grow on its own.
Check this out, guys. I wanted to say who that quote was from. I'm like standing on the shoulder of giants. I like that concept, and I've heard it said by multiple figures. And I just was like, oh, who said it? I didn't want to misquote it. And it's a complete rabbit hole. Um, you end up with like different images from ancient Greek mythology with little guys standing on top of taller ones. It seems like an older idea than being able to quote any particular person. Yeah, yeah, no, I was like, who did say that? I'm like, oh, people did
Yeah.
for a long time in a lot of ways.
But it's the nature of humanity, of human nature, really. It's to observe and give our own perspective, share our own perspective.
In a conversationally meta sense, like that, you guys are saying that creativity, it's like somebody else made it up and you're only participating in it rather than creating it, right? And then I'm like, oh, who made up this quote? And it's just an immediate rabbit hole into God knows. It's like it's a deep well, and you're like, oh, this individual. It's like a perfect example of what brought me to it.
Yeah, it's beautiful though, on the long term, I
Right.
think.
Um. So let's see. Vex, did you have another poem at the ready?
I I do in fact have one at the ready. I have two. I have the one that I started before we even started recording, and I have The Clod and the Pebble by William Blake. The Clod and the Pebble by William Blake. Love seeketh not itself to please, nor for itself hath any care, but for another gives it ease and builds a heaven in hell's despair. So sung a little clod of clay, trodden with the cattle's feet, but a pebble of the brook warbled out these meters meet. Love seeketh only self to please, to bind another to its delight, joys in another's loss of ease, and builds a hell in heaven's despite. That one's almost worth rereading.
Actually, please.
Okay. The Clod and the Pebble by William Blake. Love seeketh not itself to please, nor for itself hath any care, but for another gives it ease, and builds a heaven in hell's despair. So sung a little clod of clay, trodden with the cattle's feet. But a pebble of the brook warbled out these meters meet. Love seeketh only self to please, to bind another to its delight, joys in another's loss of ease, and builds a hell in heaven's despite.
I feel like when you're listening to a poet, okay, how do I say this? They say a word that like tingles a thing, like you feel a part of your brain get stimulated by a certain set of lines, and then it's like you write another line intuitively as it's going. You write something that rhymes with one part of it, but then they don't, and it feels like off, but then they do rhyme with something else in a way, and like it's just different. And it's like I- it's like a real live line, like a live poetic line could lead to multiple poems, but it can only, because you're reading a poem, it can only lead to one. But in so making, it's like I just find good poetry to inspire me effortlessly, where my brain just starts making shit up, and I'm like, oh, I could write that poem in different ways. And whether or not I go to actually write that poem, which I rarely, if ever, do, it's
Mhm.
just like this activation of the brain, and it's a really cool feeling. And I notice this guy's work does that time and time again, where there'll be a certain part in a poem where I feel it and it's leading somewhere, and then yeah, it's fine where it goes, but I notice my brain is making up other alternate things. I guess like music too. If you're a really good melodic line, you might think of a variation of it effortlessly, even though it's not disappointing to hear where that went with it. You could imagine it going somewhere else.
It's like you said, honestly, we all have our ideas and our input beyond what we know and share of things we've learned. We also have an input.
Cordell, did you have an original at the ready that you wanted to read?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Did you want
Before
to
you
add
read that one, was there anything else on this exact subject? But before we move on to whatever, were there any closing thoughts or whatever things that you thought throughout the day that didn't fit in quite right, or maybe another Blake poem that you thought didn't get read? You know, how about the subject of the week? Is there anything that we're missing here?
Well, I do feel that we didn't speak much about his how do you call that? His other sides, like the drawing, the illustration he made. But at the same time,
You're
it's
right.
really hard to speak about that. Like,
And you mentioned his friendship with Thomas Paine, but there's probably a lot there too, as far as
yeah. An interesting
that.
fact is that Paine, although he was born English, died with no citizenship, even though he fought in the Revolution for America and for France. And actually, the only reference there is of him on statue-wise in England is a statue with a golden plate that says "traitor."
Yeah, I
So,
was gonna say he fought against England. I doubt they want to fucking.
oh yeah, they hated him. Actually, when he was in England before he left to America, the only reason he left to America was because he tried to make a republic in England and just got his ass whooped. So,
Yeah.
um, I wonder how much it spilled on William Blake, to be honest, because I'm sure he was somehow hanging out with people like Thomas Paine, and
You're saying his homeboy turning the traitor didn't exactly promote his literary career at the time where he was at?
yeah. Plus, he probably got a lot of shit about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. So
it's,
anyway, before we got back to the Thomas Paine thing, let me get on that first thing you mentioned. You said like his different sides. Do you think there was any particular take on his work or how he was seen? Like, is there anything clearly missing from our presentation of him today? Even if we just touch on it briefly, any hot takes?
well, we did speak a little bit about his perspective about free love, but I'm not sure how far they went, but I actually suspect that they went further than what we covered it. I suspect that he was like openly for free love and
Right,
many
right.
wives and husbands and I don't know what.
Yeah, the impression I got was of a sexual liberalness and an appreciation for carnal desires, not to the extent of being a hedonist, but just being okay with that, like not as a bottom goal,
Yeah.
for pleasure, but for it being totally fine. Uh, I did get that impression in researching him, but it wasn't definitive. And the reason I sort of mentioned it loosely and didn't get into it is I didn't want to speculate and produce invalid content on the subject. So
I
I
agree
just kind
with
of
you.
was
Plus, it's
reserved
hard
with
to
that
say.
impression, but I agree with that impression.
Yeah. Plus, it's hard to say if it's actually factual or if it's a criticism that was you know, created against him. It's hard to pinpoint what makes it factual.
Hmm. I suppose in that respect we could get into like epistemology of history and like what's knowable and what isn't knowable and how well we know it. Um, on a character like this, it's probably some aspects of his life are probably undebatable because of his writing and all that. And I would guess certain things that he didn't think were worth writing down and no one was reporting on would just kind of recede into unknowability of the past, and then the kind of in between details.
Yeah.
Um, like if we were to debate how he buttered his toast or something, it just kind of depends. You know, there's a lot of aspects to life like that.
But that's good though. I mean, there must be things that we don't know.
Well, it's a fascinating case in that he wasn't famous really until, like Vexing mentioned, that he didn't really get any acknowledgement until he was like 60, and just he was a forward thinker, a kind of a radical, revolutionary sort of conceptual guy, and then he ends up getting ignored most of his life, then gets some acknowledgement, and then dies. And 50 years later, 100 years later, within 100 years, critics were like, "Have you seen how important this guy is?" So I mean, people probably weren't rooting through his wastebaskets while he was alive, trying to figure out what he did or didn't do. And so we,
Hmm.
to some extent, are limited to what he tried to make us understand. And fortunately, he was prolific in that sense and really did quite a bit. I mean, there's the 10 books he was trying to do, and said he had this new process, and I think he got through all 10, but by about the eighth one, the price went up. It wasn't profitable. So, meaning, you know, he he seemed determined. He wasn't like, he had a vision and then he had a bottom line, like, this is what I'm trying to get done, and this and that. And when it starts falling apart, he wasn't like, oh well, I'm going to stop writing. I mean, if you just look at his books, an incredible amount of work went into this, between the just graphic art, but beyond being a painter or an etcher or whatever, he had a sense of graphical design. Obviously, on the page, they're pleasant to look at. They're not a nightmarish mess. I was looking through some of the images of his books, and all I could really say to the audience is, this we couldn't possibly get into any weak subject matter we won't be able to cover comprehensively due to just time limitations and real life stuff and my own ignorance. That said, if you're interested in William Blake because of this podcast, I would say go look into it. Go look it up. His stuff is great, and there's a lot out there. It's not hard to find, and it's very enriching to just read. And even just today, I started looking on YouTube, and I found some documentaries, and I was like, oh my god! Even without reading, just for passive entertainment, a lot, like, I guess what we're producing now, but there's a lot on him because he was such an influential character.
All very good points, John. I only have two more poems, and then I think that just about does it for my part for William Blake. Is now a good time?
You should go
Yes,
for it.
absolutely.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to read two back to back because they have the same name. A Divine Image by William Blake. Cruelty has a human heart, and jealousy a human face. Terror the human form divine, and secrecy the human dress. The human dress is forged iron, the human form a fiery forge, the human face a furnace sealed, the human heart its hungry gorge. Hmm.
I
And
remember
then,
that one.
yeah.
I noticed this about Blake's work, that I don't know if it's all of them, but the ones I hear, that it's like I hear it and it washes over me to whatever extent, right? And then if I engage in it, fine. But then later when I hear it, even if I'm not listening intently, it's like the words grab my mind and they're so good. Like the the forge, the human fire, just the way he uses the words to like bring out this imagery. Um, it's very conceptually engaging for me.
Mm. And this last one I've saved for last because I really like the message in it. And this one is called The Divine Image as opposed to A Divine Image. The Divine Image by William Blake. To mercy, pity, peace, and love all pray in their distress, and to these virtues of delight return their thankfulness. For mercy, pity, peace, and love is God our Father dear, and mercy, pity, peace, and love is man his child and care. For mercy has a human heart, pity a human face, and love the human form divine, and peace the human dress. Then every man of every clime that prays in his distress, prays to the human form divine, love, mercy, pity, peace. And all must love the human form, in heathen, Turk, or Jew. Where mercy, love, and pity dwell, there God is dwelling too.
Yeah, it's a not so subtle reference to his theistical pantheism and whatnot. I mean, kind of talking about God being everywhere.
I like that he sees the God in love, and have love, have pity, have you know these respect for your fellow human beings. I think that's a pretty solid message all the way around, and that whether you believe in this religious human form being divine, return the thankfulness, return mercy, return pity, peace, and love to your fellow man. And that's a message that I think we all should get behind.
Yeah, it's like a benevolent, compassionate sort of virtue ethic that's not so subtly being like when he sees injustices, he's like, "Are you guys serious? Like, don't you care? Aren't you good? Oh my god!" Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure. I'm really happy that we got episode 1 in the bag.
Cordell.
Yes. So I've got a couple of originals, and that'll be on my side too. I'll read to you the 2 stories, which is a poem about morality and how we learn about it. There are 2 kinds of stories we tell kids. Those 2 stories will grow in us like seeds. They will be there as we shut our eyelids. While we grow older, they'll become creeds. In the first story, we are another, whom, through genius and good deeds, saves the day. It teaches us how to be together, makes us feel others' notions as in a play. We will picture ourselves as the champion, and it will inspire us to do good. Just as him, we'll feel every sensation within ourselves. We will find empathy's root. The second tells us to fear difference, or that if you do wrong, you'll be punished. That what's abnormal by your experience should be perceived as such and be banished. Usually, we use warning as threat. Thus, if we are told to be suspicious of strangers, it will become our mindset. By then, we will see the weird as vicious. Those 2 tales will conflict within ourselves, sometimes being deliberately bad, other times being good to prove ourselves. Their unbalanced symmetry drives us mad. So that was my first poem, and now the last one I read for tonight.
Right. So I have a question. Was this just a poem that you liked and felt like reading, or do you think that piece related to William Blake in any way? Like, I'm just wondering if you chose that for a reason worth mentioning.
Well, it's one of the poems that I feel talks the most about the human condition, and when I wrote it, the way I think about this poem is, if we know about human condition and what makes us being good or bad, we can be free from doing the wrong things for the wrong reasons and actually do the right things for the right reasons. And somehow I feel like William Blake had a similar approach to poetry, in which He tried to show us reality, like, the little kid that cleans the chimney, and while he criticizes the people that go in church. To me, it's like criticizing society and yet showing why it's a fair criticism.
Yeah, so some of that like indignant rage against exploitation and suffering you identify with, and just it's part of why you like his work, and saw
Yeah,
a similarity there.
yeah. And the second poem I'll read is, let's see, I just lost it. Oh, yeah. We are nothing to no one. We are ourselves in the beholder's eye. We can't know ourselves like do the others. We always feel like we wear a disguise when we're nothing, not even brothers. Looking at ourselves through the looking glass, we could never see whom we really are. We look at best, our reflection could pass for a parody of someone bizarre. We know that we are not who's facing us, yet we just don't know whom we really are. About all that, why should we make a fuss? We are nothing and certainly no star. One day we are infant, pure from sin. The next we are child running around. And soon we act exactly like our kin. Before we know it, we are underground. Still, even those who knew us don't know us. So nobody really knows anyone. We're not even really a sack of guts. Indeed, really, we're nothing to no
I didn't know you were an immaterialist too.
one. Well, I've been reading those poems for a little while.
It's just the way you're always not even a sack of guts. We're nothing. No, I'm like, oh, so you don't exist? Neat. Paging George Berkeley.
Hey,
Uh,
honestly, personally, I was really surprised by the choice of William Blake. I love it. I think it was a great choice for the first reading session. And
mhm.
I mean, when we spoke about making references to philosophers that were also kind of sociologists, I
Yeah.
actually figured we'd pick more. I didn't think of William Blake at all, and I love that we picked him. I love it. So it's an excellent surprise on my side.
All right, so I'm gonna do a little wrap up here. I might actually do some reading after this, just the things that didn't really fit into the show. I'm not sure, but I'm gonna do a bit of wrap up here on the show, guys. So I want to thank everyone for being here. We have Luna in the booth, Vexing Cat doing wonderful reading. We have our resident poet and reader Cordell, and myself, your host Jonathan Block. We all thank you sincerely for giving us this brief moment of your life to share in the appreciation of poetry and philosophy for living. This has been Not for Nothing. Thank you so much for being here. I do want to take one more moment to promote the charity of the week. There's no affiliation here. We're not getting anything from this. There'll be a link in the podcast. You'll see, and or we'll connect a link into this video on Twitch. If you're looking for this on Twitch on Saturdays, we stream live. It's Cordell, and as the stream gets new names and stuff, we'll put that into the description of the videos. The uh, the charity this week is focused on promoting to help alleviating the suffering for Australians that are suffering from the wildfires there. Feel free to pick any charity you like. You can look online for different stuff. I recommend directly donating as much as possible. But what we're promoting is twofold into my gaming interest, where I'm recommending you go check out humblebundle.com. Again, there's no affiliate thing here. I'm not giving you any link to like make any money. This is just me promoting them because I think they're good. Uh, Humblebundle.com does really nice with getting people legal copies of games that you pay for at a discount. It promotes the studios that makes the games, and the money goes to charity. If you go to the store and buy stuff, not all of it goes to charity. It's still cool, good prices, and it's charitable. But if you get the bundles, you can make all the money go to charity. And with this particular one for the Wildfire, we'll have a link to it connected to this. That Wildfire, 100% of that goes to charity. I think it's $30 for a couple dozen games. They're good games in there, some weird ones, but the idea is you're promoting a charity and getting some games and helping out these studios all at the same time. It's a win-win-win. I recommend you guys all check that out. Thanks for being here. We'll be here again next Saturday. It's going to be a while till all of this is edited and then released in podcast format. But if you're listening to this on podcast, we'll be releasing one each week on a timely schedule. I'm still not sure what day that's going to be yet. But thank you again. And now for the post wrap up content, I had some quotes here from William Blake. I have one abstract header to a doctoral dissertation based on William Blake as a philosopher. It's really interesting. And for those of you that are really nerdy and the nitty gritty on that kind of stuff, I wanted to make sure that you could hear that. It was just a bit dense for the main show. And then I think I'm going to go ahead and read this longer piece called A Prophecy. So I'm going to start off with the quotes, then maybe take a short break and then do that. William Blake quotes. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? To see the world in a grain of sand, and to see heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palms of your hand, and eternity in an hour. That's nice. All right. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not, my wrath did grow. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. You would never know what is enough unless you know what is more than enough. Oh, there you go. There's your advocation for indulgence. I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. I will not reason and compare. My business is to create. Without contraries is no progression, abstraction and repulsion, reason and energy, love and hate are necessary to human existence. No bird soars too high if he soars with his own wings. He who desires but acts not breeds pestilence. What is now proved was once only imagined. Well, there's some good ones in there. I think next week we're going to get some more quotes from the poet philosopher at hand in earlier in the show. All right, so here's the post wrap up. I'm just going to throw some dense material at you guys. This is that header from the doctoral thesis. Looks like it was written by this is a thesis degree by advisor McDougall James K. So James K. McDougall wrote this for his doctoral thesis. And this is the abstract beginning to it. I don't have the whole paper, and gosh, there's no way I could read all of that anyway. The purpose of this dissertation is to examine the philosophy of William Blake as it is expressed in his poetry and other works. The study shows Blake as a lucid and consistent thinker whose philosophy is a subjective idealism, not unlike Berkeley's, directed against British empiricism. The study is divided into an examination of his theory of gods, his theory of knowledge, his theory of what there is, his theory of man, and his ethics. Blake's theory of God is not unlike Spinoza's in that it is a pantheism, which appears as atheism to those not thoroughly familiar with Blake's thought. God, according to Blake, is an all-penetrating life force evidenced by the universality of drives, instinctual behavior, and the collective unconscious on the level of dream and imagination. Imagination is also central to Blake's epistemology. This theory of knowledge is shown to rely on voluntary changeable a priori structures of the mind. Blake calls these the imagination and explains them in terms of the fourfold vision. Dependent on poetic metaphor, Man's imagination, or the poetic genius in every man, is able to create a world of appearance, a world which is, as any world, man's mental image. Based on this epistemology, Blake's cosmology indicates a noumenal world in which pantheistico, the degree to which a theory of all penetrating life force can be considered a pantheistic one. The noumenal world is interpreted in accordance with the a priori structures of the mind, and the noumenon can appear as a result of such interpretation as phenomenon. While the phenomenon is held in being by the perceiver, the noumenon is metaphysical, static, unity independent of perception. On that noumenal level, also time is static and structured. Um, Guys, I looked into this, and just noumenon and noumenal, that means like the unperceived, like the unperceived world. Like phenomena is things that you perceive. Not noumena is things that are unperceived but exist anyways. I think, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but that's the best I got on that. Man's perception causes it to appear as progressing, but the fact that certain elements of apparent reality are recurrent gives evidence of the static essence of time. The poetic genius supplies structure also to the human experience of time. The theory of a man is dependent upon the same distinction between phenomenal and noumenal world. In reference to man, Blake distinguishes between phenomenal men and the noumenal man. The phenomenal man is principio individuations, and the nominal noumenal man is humanity as one being. In respect to man and society, Blake has a very pessimistic view. Existential religion Existential man is engaged in battle and mutual exploitation, which he insufficiently seeks to control through the institution of religion and moralities. Such institutions have a repressive effect and serve to pervert the instinctual human self. Blake's ethics, then, seek to liberate the instinctual self and to defeat reason, the originator of morality and religion. The ultimate end of such a liberation is to overcome phenomenal objectness or fragmentation for the sake of a symbiotic unity of man and man with the world. An imaginative identification of man with man and a dropping of all ego boundaries is essential to the symbiotic unity and the achievement of a universal self of mankind. Throughout the study, I attempted to cite parallel examples from other philosophers and philosophies, which examples were to help place Blake into perspective in terms of the development of Occidental philosophy, as well as to elucidate some of the key ideas in Blake's thought. Ultimately, what the study shows is that Blake is a philosopher who, like Nietzsche's Zarathustra, chose poetic language as the most meaningful and most effective vehicle for his philosophy.
It makes
So
sense
there's
too.
that.
I mean, personally, I understand why he did it. Poetry talks to everybody, while heavy philosophy thoughts just talk with the intellectuals that want to listen to it.
Yep. If you want to teach something to somebody, don't tell them you want to teach them something, tell them a story.
Yeah, it's pretty much that.
Yeah. All right. Time for the last dense piece of material before we pull the plug on this stream. This is a couple pages here. I thought 10 minutes, but maybe less. We'll see. This is called A Prophecy, also known as Europe, a Prophecy, by William Blake. The deep winter of. Fuck. Here we go. The deep of winter came. What time the secret child descended thro' the orient gates of the eternal day. War ceased, and all the troops, like shadows, fled to their abodes. Then Enitharmon saw her sons and daughters rise around. Like pearly clouds, they meet together in the crystal, and Delos professed joyed in the peaceful night, thus speaking, while his numerous sons shook their bright fiery wings. Again the night is come, that strong Urthona take his rest, and Horizon unloose from chains, glowed like a meteor in the and strike the elemental strings, awake the thunders of the deep. The shrill winds wake,
till all the sons of Urzian look out and envy Los. Seize all the spirits of life and bind their warbling joys to our loud strings. Bind all the nourishing sweet of earth to give us bliss that we may drink the sparkling wine of Los. And let us laugh at war, despising toil and care, because the days and nights of joy and lucky hours renew. Arise, O Orc, from thy deep den, firstborn of Enitharmon, rise, and we will crown thy head with garlands of ruddy vine. For now thou art bound, and I may see thee in the hour of bliss, my eldest born. The horrent demon rose, surrounded with red stars of fire, whirling about in furious circles round the immortal fiend. Then Enitharmon down descended into his red light, and thus her voice rose to her children, the distant heavens reply. Now comes the night of Entheramon's joy. Who shall I call? Who shall I send? That woman, lovely woman, may have domination? Arise, O Rinthra, thee I call, and Palamboron, thee. Go to the human race that woman's love is sin, that an eternal fire awaits the worms of 60 winters in an allegorical abode where existence hath never come. Forbid all joy, and from her childhood shall the little female spread nets in every secret path. My weary eyelids draw towards the evening, my bliss is yet but new. Arise, O Rinthra, eldest born, second to none but Orc. O lion Rinthra, rise thy fury from thy forests black. Bring Palamberon, honored priest, skipping upon the mountains, and silent Ilinithria, the silver-bowed queen. Rinthra, where hast thou hid thy bride? Weeps she in disheart shades? Alas, my Rinthra, bring all thy brethren, O thou king of fire, prince of the sun, I see thee with thy innumerable race, thick as the summer stars. But each ramping his golden mane shakes, and thine eyes rejoice because of strength, O Rinthra, furious king. And Tharmon slept 1,800 years. Man was a dream, the night of nature, and their harps unstrung. She slept in middle of her nightly song. 1,800 years, a female dream. Shadows of men in fleeting bands upon the winds divide the heavens of Europe, till Albion's angel, smitten with his own plagues, fled with his bands. The cloud bears hard on Albion's shore, filled with immortal demons of fertility, fu- futurity, futurity? I don't know that word. Filled with immortal demons of futurity. In council gather the smitten angels of Albion. The cloud bears hard upon the council's house, down rushing on the head of Albion's angels. 1 hour they lay buried beneath the ruins of that hall. But as the stars rise from the salt lake, they arise in pain, in troubled mists, owing clouded by terrors of struggling times. In thoughts perturbed, they rose from the bright ruins, silent following the fiery king who sought his ancient temple serpent formed. The fiery king who sought his ancient temple serpent formed that stretches out its shady length along the island white. Round him rolled his clouds of war. Silent the angel went along the infinite shores of Thames to golden Verulam. There stand the venerable porches of high towering rear, their oak surrounded pillars, formed of massy stones, uncut will tools, stone precious, such eternal in the heavens. Of colors 12, few known on earth, gave light in the opaque, placid in the order of the stars, when the five senses whelmed and deluged o'er the earth-born man, that turned the fluxal eyes into two stationary orbs, concentrating all things. The ever-varying spiral ascents to the heavens of heavens, where bended downward, and the nostrils' golden gate shut, turned outward, buried and petrified against the infinite. Though changed, the infinite to a serpent, that which pieth to devouring flame, and men fled from its face and hid in forests of night. Then all the eternal forests were divided into earths rolling in circles of space, that like an ocean rushed and overwhelmed all except this finite wall of flesh. Then was the serpent temple formed, imagine of infinite, shut up in infinite revolutions, and man became an angel, heaven a mighty circle turning, God a tyrant crowned. Now arrived the ancient guardian at the southern porch, that planted thick with trees of blackest leaf, in a vale, obscure, enclosed, obscure, enclosed the stone of night, oblique it stood, o hung with purple flowers and berries red, imagine of that sweet south, once open to the heavens and elevated on the human neck, now overgrown with the hair and covered with a stony roof. Downward, 'tis sunk beneath the attractive north, that round the feet a raging whirlpool draws the dizzy inquirer to his grave. Albion's angel rose upon the stone of night. He saw Urzin on the Atlantic, and his brazen book, that king and priests had copied on earth, expanded from north to south. And the clouds and fires pale rolled round the night of Entheramon, round Albion's cliff and London's walls. Still Entheramon slept. Rolling volumes of grey mist involves churches, palaces, towers, for Urzian unclasped his book, feeding his soul with pity. Thy youth of England, hid in gloom, cursed the pained heavens, compelled into the deadly night to see the form of Albion's angel. Their parents brought them forth, and aged ignorant preaches, canting on a vast rock, perceived by those senses that are closed from thought. Bleak, dark, abrupt, it stands and overshadows London city. They saw his bony feet on the rock, the flesh consumed in flames. They saw the serpent temple lifted above, shadowing the island white. They heard the voice of Albion's angel howling in flames of orc, seeking the trump of the last doom. Above the re- Above the rest, the howl was heard from Westminster loud and louder. The guardian of the secret codes forsook his ancient mansion. Driven out by the flames of Orc, his furred robes and false locks adhered and grew one with his flesh, and nerves and veins shot through them. With dismissal torment sick, hanging upon the wind, he fled, groveling along Great George Street through the park gate. All the soldiers fled from his sight. He dragged his torments to the wilderness. Thus was the howl through Europe. For Orc rejoiced to hear the howling shadows. But Palambaron shot his lightnings, trenched down his wide back, and Ristrug hung with his legions in the nether deep. And Theramon laughed in her sleep to see, O woman, triumph. Every house a den, every man bound. The shadows are filled with specters, and the windows wove over with curses of iron. Over the doors, thou shalt not, and over the chimneys, fear is written, with bands of iron round their necks fastened into the walls. The citizens, in leading gives its inhabitants of suburbs, walk heavy. Soft and bent are the bones of villagers. Between the clouds of Urzian, the flames of Orc roll heavy. Around the limbs of Albion's guardian, his flesh consuming. Howlings and hissing, shrieks and groans and voices of despair arise around him in the cloudy heavens of Albion. Furious, the red limbed angel seized in horror and torment the trump of the last doom. But he could not blow the iron tube. Thrice he'd essayed, presumptuous, to awake the dead to judgment. A mighty spirit leapt from the land of Albion, na- named Newton. He seized the trump and blowed the enormous blast. Yellow as leaves of autumn, the myriads, foe angelic hosts, fell thro' the wintry sky seeking their graves, rattling their hollow bones in howling and lamentation. Then Entheramon woke, nor knew that she had slept, and 1800 years were fled, as if they had not been. She called her sons and daughters to the sport of night within her crystal house, and thus her song proceeds. Arise, Athene- arise, Athenius, Ethinthus, God, arise, Ethinthus. Though the earthworm call, let him call in vain till the night of holy shadows and human solitude is past. Ethinthus, queen of waters, how thou shinest in the sky, my daughter, how do I rejoice! For thy children flock around like the gay fishes on the wave when the cold moon drinks the dew. Ethinthus, thou art sweet as comforts to my fainting soul. For now thy waters warble around the feet of Entheramon. Manethu, Vorcrion, I behold thee flames in my halls. Light of thy mother's soul, I see thy lovely eagles round. Thy golden wings are my delight, and thy flames of soft delusion. Where is my luring old of Eden? Lethua, sweet love. Lethua, the many-colored bough delights upon thy wings. Soft soul of flowers, Leutha, sweet, smiling pestilence, I see thy blushing light, thy daughters many changing. Resolve like sweet perfumes ascending, O Leutha, silken queen. Where is the youthful Antimon, prince of the pearly dew? O Antimon, why wilt thou leave thy mother's Entharmon? Alone I see thee, crystal form, floating upon the bosomed air. With lineaments of gratified desire, my Antimon, the 7 churches of Leutha seek thy love. I hear the soft octoon in Entheramon's tents. Why wilt thou give up a woman's secrecy, my melancholy child? Between 2 moments bliss is ripe. O Theotormon, robbed of joy, I see thy salt tears flow down the steps of my crystal house. Sotha and Thirlatha, Sotha and Thirlatha, secret dwellers of dreamful caves, arise and please the horrent fiend with your melodious songs. Still all your thunders golden hooved, and bind your horses black. Orc, smile upon my children, smile, sons of my afflictions. Arise, O Orc, and give our mountains joy of thy red light. She ceased, for all were forth at sport beneath the solemn moon, walking the stars of Urizen with their immortal songs, that nature felt throw all the pores the enormous revelry, till morning opened the eastern gate, and then on fled to his station, and Entheramon wept. But terrible Orc, when he beheld the morning in the east, shot from the heights of Entheramon, and in the vineyards of Red Francis appeared the light of his fury. The sun glowed fiery red, the furious terrors flew around, on golden chariots raging, with red wheels dropping with blood. The lions lash their wrathful tails, the tigers couch upon the prey and suck the ruddy tide. And Entheramon groans and cries in anguish and dismay. Then Los arose. His head he reared in snaky thunders clad, and with a cry that shook all nature to the utmost pole, called his sons to the strife of blood. And so I was a poor reading of Europe, a prophecy. I'm sure there was some pronunciations in there of names that were horrific. I tried to do okay with. I mean, I have an American accent, and some of this is clearly written from a British accent. So I tried to kind of ride that line. But there you go, guys. Anybody who's still
To be honest,
here, there's that piece.
it was an excellent reading, to be honest, and pretty fun actually. I didn't expect it to be this funny to listen to. If I may just give you a tip, don't forget
Yeah.
to drink water, because even if you have to take like a 5 seconds break, I think it will help you a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of writers do that because when they do readings for hours, they forget to drink, and yeah, makes even
So
I have that.
that's it for this week, guys. I already did the closeout before, but I'm just going to do a quick thanks from Cordell, Vexing Cat, Luna, and myself, Jonathan Block, your host. Thanks for being here. This has been Not For Nothing, Poetry and Philosophy for Living. I hope you have a great week. We'll see you soon.
Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.